Officially beginning the proceedings, I would humbly request all participants to ensure their mobile phones are switched to silent mode. Thank you. On behalf of the Samba Policy Research Institute, I'd like to welcome you to today's event. Our subject today will be on the role of armed forces in national development and its impact on civil-military relations. The program for today is flashed on the screen. As you can see, the event today is structured into two parts, with presentation and remarks from a total of 6 speakers. We will first hear from our virtual international speakers, and after a short hiatus for lunch, we will resume our discourse and hear from our Pakistani speakers, who are with us in IPRI today. Towards the close of our event, the floor will be open for a question and answer session. Throughout the course of the event, you are welcome to have working tea and refreshments in the hall. Our session today will be chaired by Lieutenant General Khalid Naim Lodhi. General Lodhi has served as Pakistan's Minister of Defense. He has held various command, staff, and instructional assignments in his illustrious military career, including directing staff at National Defense College, Commander Corps Engineer, and Corps Commander Bahawalpur. Previously, he has also been Defense Secretary and Chief Executive and Managing Director of Fauji Fertilizer. On account of his distinguished military service, he has been conferred the award of Hilal-e-Imtiyaz. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. Also among our list of distinguished speakers, we will be hearing from Mr. Kirill Shamiev, who will speak on the role of armed forces in national development of Russia. Mr. Shamiev is a PhD candidate at Central European University in Vienna and a research fellow at the Center for Comparative Governance Studies in St. Petersburg. As an expert in Russian civil-military relations and security sector reforms, Mr. Shamiev has published his research and analytical articles in various renowned journals and regularly provides commentaries for Russian and international media. The second presentation will be delivered by Lieutenant General Aegis Widiyo, who will be speaking on the role of armed forces in national development of Indonesia. General Widiyo is currently the governor of the Indonesian National Resilience Institute. And before he retired from the Indonesian National Army in 2003, he was serving as Chief of Territorial Staff of the Commander of the Indonesian National Armed Forces and as Deputy Chairman of the People's Consultative Assembly. He holds a master's degree in military art and science from the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, from the U.S. National Defense University, and public administration degree from George Washington University. We will also be hearing from Major General Professor Dr. Güray Alper, who will speak on the role of armed forces in national development of Turkey. Dr. Alper currently serves as the president of the Strategic Thinking Institute, as well as associate professor for social and cultural anthropology. He served permanently and temporarily in Gambia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Iraq, and rose to the rank of Major General. He is the author of numerous books and publications, including his latest book titled Understanding Turkey's Security. He has earned a Turkish Armed Forces Medal of Outstanding Courage and Sacrifice, the Bosnian Stability Force Medal, the Gambia State Medal, and the Mongolian Internal Forces Medal. In the second half, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua will be delivering a presentation on the role of armed forces in national development of Pakistan and its impact on civil-military relations, a case study of October 8, 2005, earthquake emergence. Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua has served in the Army for 32 years. Apart from varied command and staff appointments, he has commanded an infantry brigade during the 2005 earthquake emergency, where he coordinated the relief and rescue operations, other than his normal operational responsibility. He is an engineering graduate from Military College of Engineering Risalpur, besides holding Masters in War Studies from Command and Staff College Quetta and NDU. He is also a graduate of Royal Military College, Kingston, Canada, and is presently pursuing PhD as a scholar at NUST. We are also joined today by Dr. Munis Amer. Dr. Amer is currently director of the Program on Peace Studies and Conflict Resolution at University of Karachi and has 36 years of academic experience in Pakistan in different foreign universities and research think tanks. He formerly served as the Dean of Faculty of Social Sciences and Chairman of Department of International Relations at the University of Karachi. Dr. Amer is an author of several books and monographs, and he has had his research pertaining to conflict and security studies published in numerous international journals. Last but not least, we'll be hearing from Lieutenant General Nasir Khan Janjua. who will speak on the role of the armed forces in national development of Pakistan and the case study of Balochistan. General Janjua is the former National Security Advisor. He has held a military career spreading over 4 decades, and his last position was Commander Southern Command. He has also previously served as Vice Chief of the General Staff and President, National Defense University. General Janjua might be joining us shortly. Now, with commencing with the program, I would kindly like to request our member of our Board of Governors, Lieutenant General Naeem Khalid Lodi, to please offer some opening remarks.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. First of all, thank you very much, IPRI, for providing us this opportunity and asking me to chair this session, which is important for all the developing countries and so also very important for Pakistan. Once we say role of military in the development of a nation or nation building, it has two actually angles. One is that if any military creates a deterrence and creates that environment where the state and the people can work peacefully, that by itself is a sort of contribution as far as nation building is concerned. But this is an indirect thing. And at times, forces are also asked to do things directly as far as nation building is concerned. And we have seen Chinese forces, they've done a lot. Even Pakistan armed forces, we all know that they have been busy in various things. But then the second part is very important, that what is the impact of this direct nation building activities which any force undertakes. I think that is important, and we have very important scholars talking to us today, a general from Indonesia, also general from Turkey, and a scholar from, I think he's studying at Vienna, but he belongs to Russia. So we'll be talking about the contribution of Russian forces. So I think we will listen to them, make our mind, and then at the end also some concluding things must be derived from that, and I think we can forward our recommendations to the proper quarters. It is important for us to understand, and then I think we must, without feeling shy, must forward our recommendations very candidly to all the to GHQ, to Foreign Office, to the government, wherever it is relevant, that so that we can assess for ourselves that what sort of nation building is good and positive for the country, and where it becomes a little negative as far as civil military relations are concerned. So we'll just listen to the scholars first, and then we'll make certain conclusions. Thank you very much. And over to whoever is going to conduct it. So the first speaker is going to be from Vienna.
Yes, exactly.
You are going to announce that? Okay,
sure.
Thank you.
I would like to invite our first speaker, Mr. Kirill Shamiev, to please begin his remarks.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfectly.
Good, good. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be here today, especially among such a distinguished panel of speakers. And today I would like to talk a little bit about the role of Russia's armed forces in its national development. And I just realized that I cannot share my screen. I have a couple of slides. Excuse me, yes, we haven't checked it well in advance. Could you please perhaps make me a co-host or give me the rights to share the screen? Yes, I see. Thank you. So yes, first of all, it's very great news that more and more scholars and practitioners started talking about the role of the armed forces in national development, not only in conducting combat operations, but also the general development of the state. And I would also say that perhaps it's important not even for the developing states, but actually for all states, including industrial and post-industrial societies, with more or less functional military forces. Speaking about the role of Russia's armed forces in Russia's national development, Well, to summarize it, like to cut it short, it's ubiquitous, and it's been like that since, well, the formation of contemporary Russian armed forces, which dates back to the 17th and 18th century. But in contemporary Russia, we can say that the role of the armed forces are rooted in first the military's task as an important formal set of tasks that the Russia's armed forces have to accomplish, and also its military culture. First of all, the military is, of course, an important tool in Russia's foreign policy, though there are questions of strategy and tactics concordance, and I will talk more about it shortly. Secondly, the military and the military-industrial complex occupy a significant part of Russia's GDP. However, there are some problems with civil-military integration, and the economic weight of the military-industrial complex transforms into its political leverage, which still yet to be integrated. Third, Western sanctions produced an unintended consequence by militarizing the Russian technological sector, particularly in the IT sphere, due to the closure of international markets. And finally, the Russian society generally approves the military service and the armed forces, but the socioeconomic inequality prevents the military from becoming a melting pot. And I would like to start with the strategic tasks of Russia's armed forces. The first one is, of course, the deterrence of military and military political threats to national interests of Russia, then defending economic and political interests of Russia. The third one is organizing, executing territorial defense. And the fourth is participating in the support of martial law and a state of emergency. And this comes from the federal law, the main law regulating the functioning of armed forces in Russia, number 61 on defense. So, and we can see here that there is a clear foreign policy role. Again, we have such words as national interests, political interests, economic interests, but seemingly no official role in domestic national development. But of course, there is a role. And we can find some cues and traces of this role in the annual meeting of the Ministry of Defense. And in 2021, there are 4 main tasks of Russia's armed forces that are related to domestic and foreign policy developments. The first one is upholding the readiness of the nuclear triad and continuing the development of its components. The second is continuing the rearmament efforts, particularly in the sphere of robotic technologies and unmanned aerial vehicles. The third one is developing new methods of the use of force in the light of proliferation of UAVs, robots, weapons based on new physical principles. And the final one is improving the system of social protection of service members, including wages and housing. So you don't need to be a scholar to see that there are actually already here some mentionings that are related to the civilian sphere, both economic, social, and political. And this comes from the Minister Shoigu's annual speech in the Collegium of the Ministry of Defense. And there are at least economic, technological, and social roles that I'm going to talk about today. But let me start with the foreign policy. Since the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the Russia's armed forces have been involved in numerous military activities and wars outside Russia, but actually also inside Russia, but today it's because it's foreign policy, I'm talking about international conflicts. First, it's Georgian Civil War. There was also a war in Transnistria, the breakaway region of Moldova, Tajikistan Civil War, the war in Kosovo, and the famous intervention of Russian peacekeepers. Then the 5-day war with Georgia, and what is actually happening right now is we see its consequences, the occupation of Crimea and de facto involvement in the Donbass and in the Syrian civil war. So although Russia was in a state of despair after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, we see that its armed forces have been fulfilling its mission and was sent by civilian commanders to counter, first in the 90s, hostilities in former Soviet republics, but then also to counter forces that the Kremlin considered hostile to Russia's national interests. And to summarize, because we have very little time here, I can see that there is first an gradual increase of professionalism Second, civilian control in terms of on-the-field command and control structures. There are numerous occasions of illegitimate, what was called, quote unquote, volunteering of army officers and soldiers in the 90s. That is not possible in current circumstances. And of course, combat effectiveness, but with arguable political outcomes. And I will talk about it later, about the political outcomes. The second role is Russia's armed forces have in economic development. First of all, it's, of course, the Russian defense industry is closely tied to the Russia's armed forces. For example, from 2011 to 2018, the Russian army procured up to 247 billion US dollars of armaments, and the industry also exported its services and goods abroad up to 120 billion US dollars. So we see that there is the share of 2/3 and 1/3 of exports. What is also important to note, if you want to analyze Russia's military-industrial complex, that the Russian defense sector operates with rubles. So it's highly important to make purchasing power parity adjustments. And comparing in nominal dollars, for instance, with the American industry or French or British industries is invalid. So people are paid in rubles, they get their salaries in rubles, and the armaments are procured in rubles. And you can see this from the CPRI's database, that Russia actually spends quite a lot on the military and its military-industrial complex, around officially, on average, around 4% of GDP. Plus, we have a classified expenditures that can be accounted up to 4% of GDP. And also, and this is more related to domestic politics, Russia's defense interest has important political leverage. First of all, it employs up to 3 million workers, which is structurally, like these workers, they live in so-called, most of them live in so-called monotowns, monogoroda in Russian. These are small towns which are having only one, town building factory. For example, let's say one of the Ural Vagon Zavods factories that build, construct tanks. And if this company, if this factory goes bankrupt, basically the whole city will be left without any earnings. And of course, the Kremlin cannot live with these people without financial, basically without wages. And the third one is more informal. It's about the defense elites. Industrial leaders do play a role in political development of Russia. And of course, we have people in uniform or former people in uniform at the Security Council and also in the parliament, and actually in all branches of government. So the second topic I would like to briefly talk today about is the technological development. To summarize quickly, there are several sectors of advanced technological development today. First and foremost is, of course, nuclear. In the military sector, we've all seen it. These recent developments announced by Vladimir Putin, nuclear-powered torpedoes, nuclear-powered transcontinental ballistic missiles, also cyber, which is also important in contemporary international relations. And the defense industry plays an important role here because cyber operations can be conducted by people, by conscripts, alumni of IT universities, because Russia still has a mandatory service that basically, instead of serving, in the military with quite harsh, naturally harsh environment, they serve in the offices 5-6 days a week, have their holidays at home with parents, but during their work days, service days, they conduct cyber operations. And of course, the defense industry that keeps developing its IT technologies. Finally, there are these advanced technologies, developments in technologies in IDS technologies, integrated air defense systems, and artificial intelligence. Though there are some indications there is a lack of integration with the civilian sector. The second point is that Western sanctions do slow down Russia's technological advancement. For example, in the system of GLONASS, it used to be 70% of foreign components, used to have 70% of foreign components. I'm sure it's less now, but unfortunately, because it's a highly classified sector, it's hard to assess in 2021. Also in our RSTA technologies, reconnaissance, surveillance, and target acquisitions equipments, First of all, it's microchips, and Russia opted for Chinese substitutes. And of course, means of production, basically those equipment that produce armaments and all weaponries. And what is interesting today, what we are seeing, has been seeing actually since 2014, 15, there is an unintended consequences of Western sanctions. The Russian IT industry that used to be highly Westernized, like almost English speaking, they in their like work life, they were mostly speaking using English terms and focus on Western markets. They have become increasingly more statist and militarized due to the closure of Western markets. Because of course, such companies as Kaspersky and IB Industries, they can be used for dual purposes. Therefore, they formally or sometimes informally are under sanctions. Western markets don't want to work with them. And the government stepped in and provided contracts for such important companies in the military industrial sector. In terms of social development, the military is among the most trusted institutions in Russia. There is this triad, the armed forces, the president, and the FSB, the Secret Service. And it's been like that since 2014. What is also surprising, at least for me as a Russian citizen, because it wasn't like that just a few years ago, the majority of Russian in all age groups support mandatory military duty. On average, Russia has 240,000 conscripts and 400,000 all volunteer enlisted personnel. So it's a share of approximately 2/3 of all volunteer personnel, right, and around 1/3 of conscripts. And conscription still plays, first, the military service has been playing an important horizontal mobility venue. It's been working as an important horizontal mobility venue, particularly in the Soviet Union, but still is in Russia. And it strongly relates to the socioeconomic inequality existing in Russia. And conscription has been playing as an important aspect of civilian control. According to the federal law of Russia, conscripts cannot be used in outside conflicts. And of course, in politically, even if we can imagine that they were allowed to use, it would have been politically very sensitive to send conscript soldiers somewhere abroad, without their basically volunteer contract. There are also some recent developments, comparatively recent. It's been like almost 10 years since they started to develop that. The Russian armed forces began its active promotion in wider public, especially among the youth. There is so-called the youth army, Yun Armia, sort of Russian analog of Boy Scout movement in the US, but I think with more like militarized aspects. Boys and girls train how to use weapons, and they learn this military culture. With, of course, a strategic goal that they would want to go to the military later after graduating from schools. We also have so-called Cadet Schools, Kadety and Suvorovцы, Kadetское училище and Suvorovское училище. These are secondary and high schools, highly militarized, where basically kids live in the barracks. They also study general school program, but with military disciplines, specialized military disciplines. And finally, there are numerous militarized competitions. Again, inherited from the Soviet Union, GTO, Готов к труду и обороне, ready for labor and defense. And the new one, League of Heroes, contemporary, the League of Heroes. It's a set of different militarized competitions for everyone. You pay, for your ticket around $30, $40 US. And it's sort of like marathons, but in say in the woods or with some military equipment. And there are some unfortunate issues with that. First, it's, as I told you, there is a social inequality. Russia has a highly unequal society, and basically the rich does not serve. So the military is predominantly composed of individuals from lower and lower middle classes of society. And of course, it creates tensions both in terms of understanding the military, because the rich doesn't understand what the armed forces are in general, and the political perceptions of the majority of the Russian people, and the political perceptions of people from high classes of society. And the Russian military has been a vital part of the Russian society and will maintain its political significance. And we can also say that any politician that would like to have well, any federal and supreme office would like to serve in federal and supreme offices, they have to be experts, or at least they have to show that they are experts in military affairs. So to sum up my talk, I can say that there are several lessons for developing nations from Russia. First of all, the military doctrines and supreme legal documents do determine the role of armed forces in both domestic and foreign affairs. And policymakers should adopt a comprehensive approach to policymaking in the military sphere. And by comprehensive here, I mean having an ability to look at both military aspects, the use of force, armaments, military industrial questions, but also the impact of the armed forces on the society, on societies, and the impact of the society on the armed forces. It's all interconnected, and we have to look at it as a unified, interconnected system of civil-military relations. My second point is that policymakers should acknowledge the humanitarian aspect of military intervention. The military needs reinforcement from the civilian or international agencies in foreign interventions. Of course, contemporary armed forces, including Russia, they started to develop technologies and operational guidelines of conducting some aspects of humanitarian operations alongside the military ones. We can see this, for example, in Nagorno-Karabakh, as Russian peacekeepers are deployed there, and some minor aspects in Syria. But again, the military, due to its military culture, as quoting Samuel Huntington, is what the military was created to destroy things and kill people. And this civilian aspects, the humanitarian aspect of developing and humanitarian response still belong to the civilian agencies that rather should work alongside the military in hostile environments. My third point is that civil-military integration in the economic sphere is vital for long-term development. It is very important for developing nations to focus at the outset, or it will be increasingly hard to integrate later, as the example of Russia shows us. In the Soviet Union, defense and civilian interests were kind of autonomous from each other, and the Kremlin has been struggling to integrate civilian and military industries and to make, first of all, of course, the military industry produce non-military technologies and goods for the broader market. It's an incredibly difficult task, so it's understandable why there is some limited success. The civil-military integration of the industrial sector is, well, it's important because it has a multiplier effect. My fourth point is that the executive securitization of the domestic military industrial sector negatively affects its attractiveness to civilian workers and clients and suppliers. And we can see it from the pre-sanction market of advanced technologies in Russia. Before sanctions, there was a clear separation of civilian companies and industry working in highly advanced technologies, in IT, in artificial intelligence, big data, and all this like buzzwords we hear today, and the military. And the military was kind of trying to imitate what the civilians were doing. And fortunately for the military, right, the sanctions forced the civilians to work closer and actually to integrate with the military sphere. And the reason for that, why before the sanction regime, these civilians were kind of averse to working with the military, because of, again, this securitized environment, high level of secrecy. Basically, in some positions, workers had to, and still have to actually, to give away their foreign passports, so they couldn't work. So they couldn't work and go abroad even for holidays. And of course, there is some aspects that, you know, working in a highly securitized environment, there's always a chance that you can be prosecuted for some alleged like distribution of secret information. And finally, that the supply of records is a genuinely market process, and the case of Russia clearly has shown it to us. And mandatory service, even mandatory service, and I'm not even talking about the all volunteer militaries, will be inefficient without acceptable socioeconomic conditions or well-being of its soldiers, effective public relations campaigns. And Russia, especially under Minister Shoigu, has shown its success in conducting such PR campaigns, and nation-oriented ideology. What do I mean by nation-oriented ideology? It is broader understanding that the military, first of all, it's important to have a functioning military, and second, that everyone has, at least like the majority of the population has to serve and to provide some benefits to the military for the defense of our homeland. And that is it, what I wanted to talk to you today. I think there is still some time for questions, and thank you very much. There is my email. If you have any questions, you can send it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carroll. I think questions we are leaving at the end. It was a very interesting talk, and what we have gleaned is that Russian military has a very big footprint as far as the Russian society is concerned. And some of the things which were interesting is that they do control most of the industrial complex, especially the one dealing with the military hardware. You said it is a social melting point, and because of the extended and far off military operations, they must be having some say in the foreign affairs of the country. We understand that, and you also said that about 4% of the GDP is being spent on the military. And interesting point is that former uniformed people are a part of the parliament and other services quite conveniently. But one thing which you brought out is that there is a social, you can say a bit hitch, that the rich people, they don't like, they try to avoid coming to the military, but military has such a big footprint in the middle and lower class that they probably have their sway. And the last point is interesting, that the quality of forces is dependent on, just like market forces, whatever you offer to them, and accordingly the people, they would like to join and all that. Thank you very much, and we'll see what questions do come after that. And after that, I think we'll request our Lieutenant General August from Indonesia to give his point of view. Thank you very much.
Yes. Is it my turn? Excuse me?
Yes, sir, it is your turn. Please go ahead.
Yes. Again, I also share the thanks that have been mentioned by Mr. Shamir for inviting me to this distinguished discussion. And I'm asked to make a presentation on the theme of the role of armed forces in national development and its impact on civil-military relations. I based my presentation on my experience as a military officer, which I have spent for 32 years, and I retired in 2003, and also enriched by my readings. Just to give you a background of where the Indonesian military is, or with this abbreviation TNI, Indonesia was proclaimed her independence in 1945, and it originated from a nation in arms. So there was an armed struggle. Then we had to form a national defense force out of those various elements that were involved in the independence struggle. And until 1998, 1999, until when President Suharto resigned, we adopted the dual function doctrine. In essence, it's a sort of a political military doctrine, highly involvement of the military in the government. Then when President Suharto resigned, we transformed ourselves in Indonesia to adopt the democratic political system. And with that, it started to reform the military from a political military into a professional military in the context of a democratic political system. And this is where, this is the background, or this is where I will present my presentation, which is the idea or the end state of this reform process of the Indonesian military. Okay. Next, please. Yes, the role of armed forces in any country is actually the subject to the will of the people. It depends on the people of the country how they would agree to the arrangement of the military as part of the government. But of course, a difference in a political system will make a difference in the civil-military relations. Next. I would suggest that I divide it into two yes. The first one is democracy and communism. These are the political systems where they adopt the civilian supremacy, where civilian supremacy exists over the military. The difference is that in a democracy, the military will be supervised or under the supervision of a democratically elected government through the general election. While in a authoritarian communist system, the military would be placed under the civil supremacy of a central committee of the Communist Party. But both are under the civilian supremacy. While the one system where the military remains as the government is the military junta, where the military is the government. We have right now the example of Myanmar, where again the government and the military is inseparable, and where the military is practically the government. Next, please. Here is where it differs. In a government system with civilian supremacy, we divide into two, as I've mentioned. But with the military, where the military is the government, it goes directly to the military junta, where we cannot distinguish between the government, the civilian political authority, and the military. Next, please. Here also, I suggest to you to dig deeper, and where there is a government control of the military, meaning a civilian government control of the military, which includes the democratic and the socialist system, we can see that even in democracy, the democratic control of the military is still divided into two forms of control of the military, of the civilian control of the military. One is the objective control of the military, the ideal type, which I call militarizing the military, giving the military the professional sphere to develop their professionalism and to develop readiness for their task, whatever task that they will receive from the civilian authority. But in the subjective control of the military, here usually it happens into in an immature civilian political authority, where the civilian political authority tends to seek the military, the political support of the military, and with that, actually, it is civilianizing the military. Although there's still a dividing line between the military and the civilians, but the role of the military is getting near to the political role of the military. Then we have the socialist or communist system, where the supervising institute will be the military committee, and the military will exist as the organ of the party, which again supports the theme that the military, where the military is the government. Why is not divided? Because we cannot distinguish or divide between the military and the civilian government. So the military is the government, and with that, we do not see any democratic civilian control over the military. Next. The essence of civil-military relations, if I may suggest, it is actually the flow of defense policy making and implementation in the context of a democratic political system. It is initiated from policy formulation by civilian government authorities. Why does it have to be civilian government authorities? Because only civilians can participate in general election and compete for political power constitutionally. Active military cannot partake in general elections. Ending in policy implementation at the operational level by the military. So the policy formulation is in the authority of the political, the civilian political authority, while because it is in the scope of defense policies, military policies, it will end in policy implementation at the operational level by the military, followed by oversight and control of the policy by the civilian political authorities. Why civilian political authorities? Because the civilian political authorities are the authorities who have received the mandate from the people through the general election to exercise their political power to manage the state. Next, please. And to be able to see the difference or the dividing line between the civilian authorities, role of civilian authorities and the military, the civilian authorities formulate national defense policy. The civilian authorities makes the decision for the employment and deployment of the military. The commanding general cannot make the decision because he does not hold a political authority to make political decisions. And employment and deployment of the military is a political decision. Decide on the purpose of development, employment, this is employment. Decide on the purpose of employment. Assign political objectives, assign military objectives. Those are assigned by the civilian political authorities. The military elites will decide as to how to achieve those objectives. These civilian authorities will also decide on level of violence that could be exercised by the military and conduct a democratic oversight and control. Next, please. And the role of military command is to decide military strategy for the purpose of serving the political objective. Secondly, loyalty to civilian political authority and adhere all governing laws and regulation as long as the civilian political authority is a constitutional one. And third is to undertake internal management to assure readiness of military units. Next, please. In a democracy, national defense is the norm of constitutional role of the military. Other additional tasks for military could include military operations other than war, military assistance to civilian government in peacetime. This includes national development. We were familiar with the word of there was I forgot, but I will come back to it. Third is only the civilian political authorities holds the political authority to employ the military. The military commander cannot decide for itself what to do. So it has to be based on the political decision. This provides the checks and balances and control between the civilian political authorities and the military. Next, please. The situation is different in a military junta government system. The question would be, what is the source of legitimacy of the military government? So, for instance, in a country like Myanmar, for instance, if the military junta claims to be governing the country, then we ask them, what is your source of legitimacy that you have the legitimacy to govern the country? So this is the question. In a democracy, the source of legitimacy would be gained in the general election, where the political figure is the victor of the general election. Secondly, the military government will be the single authority who establishes and implements policies all at once. They, he, she establishes policies. They, he, she implements policies. So there is no dividing line of checks and balances and control, as I've shown in the third dot, and that is lack of checks and balances and control. Next, please. The role of the armed forces in national development. Actually, the responsibilities for national development lies with the government through its functional civilian institutions. If it's nation building, it's through their political institutions. If it is construction, it is through their functional institution for construction. The armed forces can be brought in the role of military assistance to civilian government in peacetime as additional mission, although not their organic mission, by the political decision of the political authorities, the president, because national defense will always be retained as the responsibility of the central government and never be given into the regional government. Addressing the mission limitations of authority, time, location, and strength to be involved. The armed forces will be referred back to its defense organic role after the completion of the task in context. Next, please. The impact of role of armed forces on civil-military relations, role of armed forces in national development. As long as the mission of assistance to national development is considered to be assistance to civilian government in peacetime by the decision of the political authority, it would not have any impact on civil-military relations. In democracy, we see the constitutionality and legality of any process. In so doing, it would have to meet the following characteristics. It is to be conducted based on a political decision of the civilian political authorities, the president in the case. It is a temporary mission with clear instructions on the provision of authority, mission, the time frame, and geographical limitations. The units will be referred back to its national defense mission upon completion of its mission. Basically, it is the employment of the idle capacity of the military, which is designed for war purposes in civilian purposes on a temporary basis. Next, please. This is to show you where the Indonesian military came from when they originated as the guerrilla fighting units during the struggle for independence. You can imagine. Here began General Nasution was the commanding general of the Indonesian struggle forces. Here began the creation of an army with its own initiative. It was an army which formed itself on its own initiative, which acquired and armed itself, and which carried out its operations according to its own decisions. Here was the starting point of the Indonesian military, becoming the political military, going through the subjective civilian control over the military, meaning the using the military to support the political authority, giving political support to the political authority. So this was the starting point. And after the TNI reform, here is where we are going to as the end state of the arrangement. Next, please. A professional military in the context of our democratic political system, TNI reform in concrete terms, to position the TNI consistent with the roles and authorities mandated by the Constitution and guided by the principles of democracy. 2, to end TNI's involvement in politics. 3, to carry out the mission of national defense, focusing on external threats. 4, to end TNI's perceived role in law enforcement and internal security by transferring it to the police and other institutions. 5, to end TNI's perceived monopoly in its relationship with the people. As we know, in a guerrilla strategy, it is a myth to say that between the freedom fighters and the people is like a fish, and it's like the relationship between fish and water. So it is to end TNI's perceived monopoly in its relationship with the people and management of national resources by transferring it to civilian political authorities. TNI is to be employed by the political decisions of the president, and TNI shall not make any political decisions. Next, please. I think we have conclusion. So the primary role of the military is national defense. In essence, I apologize for the misspelling. It is a war-fighting mission by the decision of the political authority. The military can be assigned roles outside its primary role, including national development, in the role of military assistance to civilian government in peacetime. Any roles given to the military has to be based on the order of the civilian political authority as the legitimate holder of political authority from the people in democracy. In a military junta, the military is the holder of the political authority. The question arises, where does the military ruler get his political legitimacy from? Essentially, it is by the will of the people to adopt any system that it deems best. Although the question of source of legitimacy and forms of checks and balances and control will arise if they decide to adopt the democratic political system. Civil-military relations reflect the relationship between holder of political authority to employ the military and formulate policies, and the military as the implementing institution of the policy as a consequence of the employment of the military. I think that concludes my presentation, and I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General August. You gave us a very interesting presentation, initially covering the academic and the generic portion of the subject, that how army should be controlled politically. And you also gave us the journey of Indonesian forces from initially dual doctrine to dual and hybrid doctrine to professional army. And very interesting point that role of military subject to political will, but then again, after that, it can be an objective control and a subjective control, and which meant that only professionals can control the military. Whosoever wants to control the military, they must have some professional acumen to control such an outfit. That is what I understood. Then about civil-military relations, you brought out some very good points that higher military leadership must understand the policy objectives. Only then it will be accepted, and then a temporary or emergent nation-building task is more acceptable to the society rather than a permanent role of the armed forces in concrete nation-building. Thank you very much. The questions we will be asking later on, and now I will request Professor General Gore Alpar from Turkey to give his perspective. Thank you.
Dr. Alper, please, maybe kindly request you to begin your presentation. Are you with us, sir? Are we audible
Please.
to you?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, I am with you. I have a presentation. Is it possible?
yes, absolutely.
But it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think you may be required to do it now. You have been made the host, co-host.
Oh.
You have been made the co-host, so you can begin.
I want to share, but can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you so much.
We can see that, sir.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much for organizing such a nice seminar, my colleague. Before I start my speech, I would like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak in this study. And I would like to express my gratitude on behalf of myself and my institution. Distinguished panelists, it is the presentation. It is the peace environment that is always desired for human beings. However, for some reason, the phenomenon of war appears more frequently in international relations. It seems that war would always exist, and as long as there are people, even if it is not wanted. A world without war is always imagined. Written by English writer Thomas More in 1516, Utopia is an imaginary island whose whereabouts are known. Its people are not a warrior society and only go to war to protect themselves. We don't know if such an island really existed, but even this island had a trained army. In the background of preparing for war, there is an idea of ensuring the current and future security of the state and people. Security is the need of everyone and every state. When a power is mentioned, although violence and use of force come to mind, it is possible to transform it into a power with the effective use of elements that constitute power by activating various dynamics. If these elements cannot be converted into power, they remain just a potential. Military power is at the forefront in matters related to strategy and security. However, power is not only violence and coercion. It makes sense if used together with psychology, strategy, and diplomacy. In this context, it is important not only to have power, but also to use it effectively and rationally by combining it with the other powers. Powers can be used directly as well as by using someone else or with them. Just as a culture is the cumulative civilization of society, all cultures contribute to the formation of war culture. This cannot be in 1 year, 10 years. It takes a long time. So that some countries have a strong military culture, and it affects all the things, all the war, all the security issues. Security refers to the situation in which the danger of people and goods are eliminated and the perception is created in this regard. Security comes immediately after the physical needs. It is the structure to meet the military security needs. Police and paramilitary forces are structures that were later created over time. There is another security force called Inderband organization in Ottomans. And in Persian, there means passage and band means holding. It started to be formed on the basis of the needs since the foundation of the state. Like today's gendarmes, they provided security on roads and especially the mountain region. It was developed on the basis of the Tultavuk system of the Ilhanate. There were guards of 25, 30 people in the castle of the road. They would receive some wages from the passengers they secured, and in return, they would pay compensation if something happens to them. There were mosques, schools, and shops around the small castle. Thus, villages and towns developed around it, just like in Derbent district of Konya province in Turkey, in today's Turkey. And there are other Derbents named different places, such as Caucasus region. This was the policy of resettlement in a somehow secured area. With the Ottoman Empire, the Derbent organization also disappeared. Europeans also modeled the system and used it to provide security. The formation of this institution clearly demonstrates the contribution of security to development. Another example we will give from Turkey in terms of the contribution of the army to develop in the initiation of development and modernization from the army and then transferred it to the civilization field, civilian field. The modernization efforts, which started in the Ottoman Empire after the 18th century, first started in military area, military field, and then transferred to civilian areas. This ranking has survived to the present days. Another issue is the use army as a soft power. This is not easy. Some people think that this is easy, but not easy. During a conversation with a big nation's diplomat, when they entered a country, I said to them, how could you stay there? They said, why not? I said, think about it. Do you have a connection with them? Do you have a tie? There must be three ties if you go somewhere: cultural tie, or economic tie, or historical tie, maybe religious tie. If you don't have this type of connection, even you are a big power, you cannot stay there. And what happened years later, they understand this, but it was very expensive for them. The history of Turkey's aid activities goes back to the 19th century. On this day, a group of Turkish officers were sent to Kashgar to train Yakup Bey's army in eastern Turkestan in 1910. A group of Uzbek students came to Istanbul to learn about the reforms activities of the Turks and for education. And then with the agreement signed with Afghanistan in 1928, Turkey sent educational officers, doctors, and teachers to Afghanistan. Apart from these efforts, Turkey started to contribute financially to the UN Technical Assistance Program, which was initiated in 1949 as of 1987. And the first activity is carried out in this context years for Iran and Pakistan in 1971. The military has a great role in the development of economic relations. For example, the relations that started in the military field with Gambia, a West African country. I have served that 2 years, were quickly reflected in the other field, especially in the economic field. It has rapidly developed a relation with the Turkey, Gambia after the 1990s. It was clearly stated at the Turkish African Congresses, the first of which was held in November 2005, and the second in December 2006, that Turkey is in a position to share its experience in military and security related matters, as well as in other fields with many African countries. And it is the importance of military cooperation established in the early 1990s with the Gambian state can be taken as a model for many African countries, and the Turkish interest in Gambia can be obtained more easily in other countries. And in 1990, there were no export for Africa, for Gambia especially. And then now it's getting better and better, starting from the military relationships. So it is easily be transferred to the other area, starting if you start some relationship in military field. The army also benefits the country's economy and development with the weapons and equipment product. Many countries in the world earn a great income from the sale. After Turkey's success in areas such as Syria, Karabakh, Libya, and Iraq, many countries started to demand weapons produced by Turkey, and now we can see on the screen export during the last 3 years, export increased 30%, and buying weapons from the other countries is decreasing. I think that maybe a few years later it will increase again, and maybe in the near future we will not buy weapons from the other countries. And another issue is the armies and the civilians relationship. This is also important, and the army members should know not only military issues, also culture, sociology, psychology, and must be together with the society and never separate themselves from the people, And in a country, there must be a strong ties between the army members and the people living in that country. This is compulsory issue. Otherwise, it's not easy to operate in that area and to be successful. The army in Turkey has played a supporting role in many areas, such as prostration, literacy education, healthcare, and emergency aid. With its discipline and organization, the army in a widespread area, the army seems to be the most suitable institution to fulfill this role. In this respect, we would be logical for a country to take advantage of its capacity in the areas needed, rather than evaluating the army, which is one of the national power, as a separate power. These powers should act together. If you separate one of them than the others, then it is not easy to stay as a strong country. And finally, the military is 1,000 of years of experience, and it cannot be launched that countries do not make effective use of its experience. At the end of my speech, I would like to thank you for your kind invitation to such a well-organized event and extend my deepest respect to all of you. It was very nice meeting you. As I mentioned before, I am currently in Adıyaman region, eastern part of Turkey, for a conference, and I have a flight to Ankara in the afternoon. Therefore, if you excuse me, I will not be able to attend the afternoon program. I apologize. I'm very sorry about it. I wish you a great success in your work, and I would like to state that we will always be honored to host you in Turkey.
Acha. Thank you very much, General Dr. Guru Alper. It was very interesting to listen
You are
to
welcome.
your perspective. You very rightly said that war is likely to exist as a human in human society because it is some social thing which keeps happening always. Existence of power alone is not enough. The ability to use it should also be there. That was a good lesson. And importance of military culture. You said that the military they do not evolve just within a short time. It takes a long time, and I think maybe Afghan military is one of the examples in front of us. Then special forces, you talked about modernization acquired by army was transferred to civil society. I think this has also happened in many other countries. Even in United States, we have seen that many things which were first learned by the armed forces of America, they were later on transferred to the civil society. And you brought a very important point that armies must have a cultural, social connection with the people. And all paths must be employed in harmony. These are very important points. And what I'll do is, because you have to leave, if anyone has any questions from the general from Turkey, I think we can ask him now. So anyone online or anyone from the audience, if they want to ask anything about whatever he has presented, that will be, we can ask him now.
Okay, sir. I have a question. You mentioned Turkish Armed Forces' role in promoting health and education. Could you tell us a little more about that role in health and education?
Yes, at the beginning of the Turkish Republic, the literacy was common, and most of the people, some of them, they didn't know how to read or write. And I remember when I young soldiers, we have in every military area there was a school for the soldiers, and young soldiers, they were 18, 19 years old. They were coming to our military base, and some of them, they didn't know how to read or write. And to increase and to teach them how to read was our job. Yes, we were training our soldiers and how to fight them, and the other times, every night there was lesson for them. Also, there were some teachers were coming to their compulsory mission in the military, and every night they were giving a lesson to them. And also the health issue is we have doctors in every base, and in every region of the Turkey there was military base. And if from time to time we are going to villages and we are giving health in the area of health, we are giving help to them. And if they have a problem in some part of the Turkey, maybe there is no road, the other issue, if they have an emergency issue, we were sending our military doctor, sometimes using helicopters, we're using to them. It's a good issue to tie the people. And so this type of connection is good for the people, and we feel their support after them. And there is the military issue is not only the fight. Also, you need to create a connection heart to heart, and like Pakistan and Turkish people. And so we feel each other, and we are always together. If we see Pakistani people in Turkey, and so always we go there and talk to them as a friend, as a brother. And so this is the issue of the humanity issue also to fight. If you think that I have a power and only power can solve all the problems, this is not enough. But the other power is sometimes stronger than the military power. This is the mistake some countries today in the international area, and only using power to go a country and to take all the material from them. And they cannot be successful enough if they not use this soft power.
Thank you, Jaina.
Yeah,
Of
welcome.
course, you give a very candid aspect and especially punching point. But my question is regarding the Turkish experience, because Turkish armed forces were having a predominant role in the constitution and also holding the secular values. For that aspect, we have also seen that so many times the democratic governments were disposed of on some issues. But lately, there is a renaissance in the armed forces and the civil military relations. They've improved, and now the civilian authority are having a predominant role. In your perspective, and especially from armed forces, and seeing both sides of the pictures, one was the Mustafa Kemal era, and now is the Erdogan era. So what is the difference between the civil-military relations from the previous experience and now in the present era? How is it cemented the Turkish nation as a whole, and how democracy is secure, and how now they are playing the role in the civil-military relation, especially in the development? Thank you, Indy.
Thank you very much for this question. As I mentioned before, the military culture comes from the ground, not only 10 years, but more than 2,000 years. So it is related to the people living in the country. There is one issue, the state issue. State issue requires long-term policy. And the president, the prime ministers, and the political issues, daily basis, it can be changed from one year to another. But the state policy and the peoples stay in that country, and it is more important than the others. And sometimes can be small problems between them. We don't want this, but sometimes can happen. But we are wise people. We can solve our problems easily. It is normal. If there is a human, there is a problem, and our job is to solve the problems. And so I think in Turkey, this is not a big issue. This is not a big problem. And the people, there is a strong connection between the people and the army. And you see that 5 years ago, there was a problem in our country, but we solved this. And during this period, people think that Turkish army's power will diminish, reduced. But as you see, during these years, everything be corrected in a short time, and Turkey is everywhere to help the people around it. This is very important. If you have a strong culture in military area, you can lose from time to time. You can lose a war, but you can collect your forces and you can go again. This is the country's power. This is more important than the daily basis issues.
There's another question. There's another question.
General, I
You are
have a
asking all
question.
the question to me.
Okay.
Because you had to leave, that's why.
Okay, please.
General, as I know, there is a compulsory military service in Turkey. So I have a question in this regard. How this compulsory military service is impacting the national development and the civil military relation in Turkey. For example, I take the example of South Korea. There also the compulsory military service is there, but they have the perceived enemy North Korea. Apparently, Turkey has no perceived enemy, but still you have the compulsory military service. And to me, as a student of military history, maybe this is a compulsory military service I have seen in Turkey. This is a festivity. If somebody is going in starting his compulsory military service, it is celebrated. So how this phenomena of compulsory military service as a humanitarian or international law, this is a negative connotation. But in your society, this has a positive connotation, and how this is impacting national development and civil military relations. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. When you look back the history of the military issue in Asia, in Europe, you can see different types of military service. Some of the compulsory military service. Yes, we have compulsory service. We don't use them in operational area mostly, but in some areas we need. But in a strong society, you need the military service, such as Turkey, because what the means of the compulsory service? There are some young people coming from different areas of the countries. They are living in an same place, rich or poor, doesn't matter. This is the equality. They see each other. A soldiers come from the east, a soldiers comes from the west, different cities, different region, and what even some of them rich, some of them poor, they come together and they live together. They live each other. One of the benefits from the military is this, to connect the society together. The people know each other, understand their feeling. This is more important than the others. This is not only for military issue. After the military, they go their cities and they have friends from different places. They connect the society together. That's why we need the compulsory military service. But in operation area, yes, we have professional soldiers and some weapons today. They require professional soldiers to use them, of course. But in some areas, you cannot use the, if you use the professional soldiers everywhere, it is not enough. So the mentality of the professional soldiers and the compulsory military service is different. The others, the compulsory service, when they come to compulsory service, they don't think the money. This is for the country's issues. They comes from the heart, and so in Turkey, if they cannot allow them to participate in military service after some exams, the health exams, people are sorry if they don't go to military service. The other people think that there is some mistake for the people. And in Turkey, for example, for me, I came to eastern part of the Anatolia, and I wanted to see some historical places. There was a driver last night. During the journey, always he mentioned about the military service, and this is the honor for the people. This is, I think, this is important, and some people they think that the only professional soldiers can all the problems. This is a sociological issue also. We need to think about it.
Thank you very much, General Gure Alpar, because you have to leave. So let me express my gratitude. And on behalf of IPRI and all of us sitting here, we are grateful that you spared your time and gave us a very good insight of the Turkish armed forces in the society, how they think about the army. So thank you very much, and we look forward to have you again on various seminars. And we would
Thank
also
you very
like,
much.
on behalf of IPRI, we would also like that if you have a similar seminar at your end, you can invite some of us. We'll be there very gladly there. So I have requested.
Anytime. It's a great honor for me also. We are waiting you to Turkey also.
So thank you very much, General. So kind of you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think IPRI has agreed to one amendment because we have two guests who are waiting, and I never wanted that they should wait during our lunch stay. What I proposed is that we will ask questions from our Indonesian general and also our friend from Russia now, so that they don't have to wait later on. So anyone from the audience or online, if they want to ask any question, we can do it now. Is it true?
Right, sir. So I have a question from General Angus. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, you're referring to me.
Okay, I am asking a question from you, sir. Yours was a fascinating discourse, wonderful presentation on Indonesian perspective. My question is that in Indonesia, there was a Dwang Fosi, dual role function. And even after Suharto, there was a time once the military even used to be in the parliament. And then General Widodo and he went for a conscious attempt to pull back the armed forces from active politics. Some observers say that that was a consequence of realization in the armed forces that since the economy was growing, they wanted to connect to the mercantilist model. And that is why the army took a backseat from dual function. Though, despite pulling back, there's a great deal that they are doing at the moment, supporting the democratic government. So how would you comment on military's voluntary pulling back from the active politics and its current role in supporting the democratic governance as well as national development?
Thank you, sir, for your question. I did not hit in detail that part during my presentation because that would take a longer time. But I have the pleasure to respond to your question. It's almost like a fairy tale too good to be true. That during that time, when there was the political reform into democracy, actually the discussion on democracy had not only started when Indonesia transformed itself into democracy. Starting as of the 1980s, democracy had already been debated and discussed within the civil society, within the military, because we had a vibrant civil society. If you recall that when President Suharto became the president, it reopened the interaction of Indonesia with the international community. If you recall that President Sukarno, our first president, had withdrawn and resigned the membership of Indonesia from the United Nations. And we were practically became an outsider in the international community. But when President Suharto became the president, it reopened into our relationship with the international community. So there was a vibrant civil society, just about everything. And also that includes the sending of military officers into foreign military education institutions. And that's where we had, we were fortunate to get lessons learned and did our comparative study our comparative study. So it was actually from those officers who were fortunate to have access to different systems and make comparative study, that when we came back and we knew that democracy was coming, we asked the question, can dual function survive when Indonesia becomes a democracy? Are the principles of dual function still valid in a democracy? And it seemed that that cannot be retained, and that we were lucky that we had anticipated early to the upcoming role of the military in a democratic political system, and that we were not caught by surprise. We were caught by surprise because of the democratic transition, but the military was ready, and that the reform of the military was self-initiated from the military itself, from inside the military. That is what had caused that the military reform in Indonesia followed a smooth transition, and that when it was time, because when President Suharto resigned, we had to think of replacing political system to replace the political culture of President Suharto. And rather than jumping in to involve itself into the crowd of trying to seize power, the Indonesian military took that opportunity to make a distance and left the political transition to the politicians, to the political elites, and that we were ready to become a professional military in a democratic political system. Of course, it was not without challenges. And as in any challenges, the challenges would be, we are facing a new democratic political system in its infancy. We are facing political authorities with inexperienced exercise of politics. That was our challenge. But the military had the strength not to re-enter politics, and that we had confidence that the political elites will take good care of the country. Although, again, it's not that easy. It was not a fairy tale. Right now, we come to the situation where, although the military had transferred full political power to the civilian political elites, there seemed to be some lack of confidence within the political elites to exercise their political power, although that they have quote unquote, they have won their power constitutionally, legally, through the general election. But it was a legacy from the past, maybe, that for any civilian politicians, that they do not have the confidence if they do not get the political support of the military. So there was a kind of a sort of a gesture to invite back the military. But we were lucky that when the military moved into their position as a professional military, it was directly locked by constitutional legalities, by laws, which contained words, nomenclatures, as in the democratic principles: civilian supremacy, civilian oversight, such as those terminologies. So that fast locking through legalities prevented the military of facing a back current into moving back into the past. But culturally, there is still that push and pull. So that hopefully explains some of the facets of the transition in Indonesia.
General Agus, I would like to ask about, in the end of your presentation, you said something about the myth in terms of freedom fighters and people. So could you kindly elaborate? This is a first. And the second is about the
yes.
role. Yeah. And the second is about the role of armed forces in the area of national development, how it is done. Because Indonesia is a country, you have hundreds and thousands of islands scattered. So how that role is defined and is implemented? Is there any constitutional type of a provision in terms of armed forces role for national development, given the diversity of Indonesia stretching from Sumatra all the way to Timor, East Timor and all that? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I missed the central point of your first question, but I try to answer the second question first. In democracy, the most important thing is the procedure. That the authority to start employing the military should come from the proper authorities. It is not a matter of right or wrong policies, but it is a matter of the question of constitutionality. So if the procedure of constitutionality is followed, which the president can anytime employ the military to assist in national development, that would be constitutional. Now, whether it is right or wrong, whether it is correct or incorrect, that would be the process of the control of the legislative body to question the executive body of why they have started to employ the military in such a way. So it is a political process. It is more like in the past, during the Cold War, we are used to the term civic missions. So any roles outside the defense, national defense role would be in a sort like civic mission roles of the past, but by the decision of the political authorities. With that, it gives what we call the constitutional foundation or basis for the military to go all out to conduct their mission in accordance to the decision of the political authority, although it lies outside the constitutional or organic role of national defense. Could you refresh me on your first question, please?
Yes, sure. If I recall correctly, the end of your presentation, you said something about the myth, and the myth engulfing the freedom fighters and the people. I mean, what you were basically referring to? Were you referring to the struggle or the liberation movement against the Dutch? Those who were in control of Indonesia at that time. So what sort of a myth you were, if I have heard you correctly?
Yes, our National Defense Force started from a sort of a nation in arms. Indonesia had to form a national defense institution, which would be an amalgamation or a collection from those freedom fighters that we had during the struggle for independence. Those consist of ex-Dutch soldiers, mainly officers, only very small minority, members of the motherland or defendants of motherland, which was created by the Japanese. And the third was the scattered, from the scattered freedom fighter units. And if we call that any effort to pursue national independence is actually a political effort. So by that those that we had to put into one national defense, that they had already some ideologies within those freedom fighters fighting units. And with that, I can say that the NI, starting from its formation or establishment, will have to get used to stop politics into entering into the military, and also to stop from the military entering politics. That effort started from the origin and inception of the Indonesian military, and that continued with the form in the context of modern times also. But there was a gradual, of course, a process. There were also some incidents in the process of amalgamating and putting all those into one national defense force. But that was the challenge, and that is also what we are seeing now in essence, and that is preventing the NI to enter politics, and preventing also politics to enter the NI, and to maintain the DNI as an independent, modern professional force, defense force. If that answers your question, is there anything that I have not answered?
Yes, thank you very much. It's very clear.
Well, I will be asking this question from our Russian front. He's not there.
So thank you very much, General August. We are grateful on behalf of all those who are sitting here in IPRI and those who are listening to you online. Thank you very much. We are grateful. And again, I would request that whenever IPRI invites you in future, please do oblige us. We'll keep calling you, and whenever, because you are heading probably an institution, or you must be in some of the institution in your country. Whenever you want us to participate in any of the seminar, please feel free. Thank you very much. So kind of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation.
Ladies and gentlemen, because Mr. Kirill from Russia will be joining us after 3 o'clock, so I think we'll now have a lunch break and then rejoin after how much time? After half an hour? Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, guests and participants. Welcome back. If I could please kindly request all participants to take their seats now. We're going to begin and resume our presentations. If I could kindly request Acting President IPRI, Brigadier Rashid Wali Janjua, to please take the floor. Over to you, sir.
The topic on which I'm going to speak is the role of armed forces in national development and its impact on civil-military relations. Now, this is not a classic civil-military exposition in the theoretical plane. What I have configured by way of the presentation is a short case study, which will basically showcase a concordance between the military, political elite, and the people. And this is, in essence, one of the theory by Rebecca Schiff, which brings about much needed concordance. And as a micro cause, if it is extrapolated on the larger scale, this displays the unity and its impact on those relations. And it's a small case study of development also, as and the emergency response as well. And I'll also touch upon a little on what armed forces achieved by way of initiation of CPAC. Many nowadays believe that CPAC was initiated sometimes 10 to 12 years ago, but the concept was very much there since 60s. And the people who actually operationalized, I'll be speaking a little about those who actually went on to those areas and initiated what we now call CPAC. Now, when we speak of role of armed forces and its impact on civil-military relations, we have heard Indonesian speaker also, we heard Turkish speaker also. What we have gleaned is that there's a thin line that separates the role expansion and actually the development role of the armed forces. Pakistan, because of its security compulsions, has had a very strong military component, and the civil-military balance has always remained a contentious issue. But I think, like most developing countries, we have learned our lessons well. Most of the lessons have been internalized very well, and now kind of an equilibrium appears to be gaining ground. When we speak of civil-military relations, we know that this literature came in three waves. The first wave was from 1920s, and it went on till Korean War. There were classic, theorists like Harold Laswell, Samuel Huntington, Samuel Feiner, whose classic treatise, The Man on the Horseback, is a byword nowadays. I'll not bore you and not bombard you with theorists, but just trying to establish a framework before I begin with my formal presentation. And the second wave was from post-Korean era, 50s till 1991 Gulf War. See, so these theorists are neatly categorized into these three waves. And the third wave was post-91, which continues today. Now, when we segue into the domain of national development, the criticism that comes towards armed forces is that somehow this role expansion results into encroachment of political space. So how to counter that? This has been debated by the theorists in the third wave, and especially in the United States. There are theorists like Louis Goodman, who have given a very good exposition, and they've indicated three indicators that if those are fulfilled, that shows that the mission is in the national interest. And the first indicator is that the armed forces, they are having the support of the public opinion and public sentiment. The second is that the armed forces do not get detracted from their mission so much that their professional competence is jeopardized. And the third is that the armed forces have the constitutional mandate and they are called upon by the political leadership. If these three conditions are fulfilled, then any involvement into the non-security or non-military sphere, this is in the benefit of the country. And this is Louis Goodman's quote. There are skeptics like Richard Cohn and Riza Brooks, and especially the doyen of the third wave, who was Mark Platter and Larry Diamond. They wrote a treatise essentially saying that displaying skepticism within the context of the United States Army's role expansion. And they said that the combatant commanders for the United States are becoming Caesars, and they are shining the State Department and other development, national political institutions. And there is a greater need, therefore, for military not to remain separated, but to get more engaged to understand the nuances of political culture of the country. So that in Huntington's notion of subjective control, they are more civilianized, not militarized, which is the objective control notion. So with this short exposition, I go to the formal part. Armed forces have been the agents of change in different countries since antiquity. In contemporary world, the role of the armed forces in national development has been palpable in the shape of their contribution to national economy, infrastructural development, peace and stabilization operations in restive zones, countering terrorism, relief operations in emergencies, and combating organized crime in support of police. The armed forces in countries like Egypt, USA, China, Pakistan, Indonesia, Turkey, Iran, Vietnam, and South Korea have had a stellar record of infrastructural development and contribution to national economy. The growing role of the armed forces, especially in the political economies of the developing nations, is a veritable cause célèbre, in as much as it helps fuel the national economy of those developing nations. The organizational strength, discipline, and technical skills like engineering, medicine, communications, and logistics help the armed forces to lend a helping hand to the national governments in peacetime as well as complex emergencies. The above cannot be achieved without a concordance in the civil-military relations, where the armed forces are extensively involved in the national development. The concordance theory propounded by Rebecca Schiff reiterates the above, along with deepening the integrative nature of best balance in civil-military relations, as opposed to Huntington's theories that celebrate separation of the civil and military spheres. The concordance theory celebrates the integration of the political institutions, armed forces, and the citizenry. A complete concordance between political elite, armed forces, and the people can be ideally achieved if the civilian policymakers encourage armed forces by making optimum use of national development capabilities. The impact of above is envisaged in the shape of greater value convergence between civil and military components of the state, leading to improved civil-military relations. The history of Pakistan indicates a very important role of the armed forces in national development and integration. The recruitment pattern of the armed forces and the social composition of the officers' corps, according to Rebecca Schiff, plays an important role in civil-military harmony. In Pakistan's case, the progressively inclusive recruitment system has broadened the base of human resource, along with change in the British era social composition of the army as well. The greater representation of smaller provinces and broad-based of recruitment has made armed forces a strong instrument of national integration in the face of vociferous tendencies of the ethnic subnationalisms unleashed due to socio-economic deprivations in the country. Scholars like Lawrence Ziring have pointed out the civil-military propensity in Pakistan to prefer national integration over other socio-political priorities. One of the most important elements of stability in post-colonial societies with overdeveloped state and underdeveloped political systems such as Pakistan, which is the thesis of one of the most eminent political scientists ever produced by this country, Hamza Alvi, is that the existence of armed forces as a symbol of national unity representing all classes and ethnicities in a geographically diverse country. The accent on esprit de corps, merit, and non-parochial ethos inculcated in the armed forces made it an ideal integrative force in a newly independent nation where the political forces had yet to grow strong roots in the masses. The military in Pakistan, therefore, right from the start, had started playing an important role in social, political, and economic development of the country. Due to the perennial threat on our borders, faced with an implacable foe bent upon undoing the gains of independence, Pakistan was compelled to accord salience to the armed forces for its survival. A modern military structure, therefore, was created over the foundations of the strong colonial military traditions bequeathed by the British. The military's modernization and consequent development into the most organized and disciplined institution of the country in the 50s invested it with a unique sense of guardians of the nation and an instrument of modernization and development. The military, unlike Huntington's notion of objective control, which meant acquiring professional autonomy by the military in return for its non-interference in politics, was compelled instead to act as per Morris Janowicz's model, which was a constabulary model of supporting civilians in nation-building tasks. The role of militaries, even in global powers like USA, has come under scrutiny for a need for greater value convergence on socio-political level. Huntington, who had written essentially in US context on civil-military relations, had recommended separation of military and civilian domains. This complete separation of military from civilian affairs and the politics in USA is coming in for a fair bit of criticism from scholars such as Isa Brooks, who recommend greater involvement of the military in national affairs to understand the compulsion of the civilian leadership while planning the country's wars and other non-military tasks. The United States military has enhanced the global footprint in national in foreign policy and defense, and is an active participant in many policy debates concerning United States military's overseas commitments in pursuit of political objective. Since many foreign and domestic tasks assigned to armed forces straddle military and political domains, the inclusion of the military leadership in national policy-making process in an institutionalized way serves the national cause much better than operation in silos. Pakistan's peculiar geopolitical environment has allowed the military to take center stage in national security as well as nation-building tasks. The military in Pakistan has acted as an agent of social, political, and economic change due to its progressive outlook, technical competence, and exposure to foreign education and training. Due to certain strengths as response capacity, natural calamities, developing infrastructure in difficult environment, and security provision, it was relied upon by the civilian government as deus ex machina to do things ordinary civilian organizations shied away from undertaking. The public opinion has always been shaped by traditional reverence of the population for the military as guardians of the national frontiers. The sacrifices of the military in wars with an enemy bent upon undoing Pakistan has always resonated well with the people, who in turn also reposed equal faith in its capacity to deliver nation-building tasks. Military has rendered yeoman service in the national development since early years of independence as the most organized institution, having diversified capacity portfolio spanning a wide gamut of competencies like law enforcement, disaster relief, infrastructure, construction, and logistics. It has been consistently pressed into nation-building tasks by the government. The eighth wonder of the world, the famed Karakoram Highway, has been a crowning achievement for the Army Corps of Engineers. You are proceeding on a mission to construct a road linking Pakistan to China. Presently, there will be no contact with you for some time. Detailed instructions will follow. This is the biggest challenge thrown to the Corps of Engineers. We want to make the road in competition with Chinese road builders who would be working next to you. Not only the Corps, but also the whole country will look forward to your achievement. Wish you good luck and Khuda Hafiz. With these few words, the Punjab force was sent to China from where they started off. 200 men of an advanced party of that Punjab force that was raised to build Karakoram Highway, linking Pakistan with China in 1966, was a precursor to the legendary Frontier Works organization. So this Punjab force was in fact a mother entity which gave birth to FW. The process of Sino-Pakistan cooperation had begun in right earnest after the 1965 war, when a US-wary Pakistan started looking east to address the strategic vulnerability of over-reliance on Western economic and military aid. Since the Chinese were also seeking to break their international isolation, the fortuitous concatenation of these interests resulted in a proposal to construct a friendship highway that linked both countries. Technical delegates of Pakistan and China met at Kashgar in January 1966, worked out the modalities of the project, and after 5 days of deliberations, the two countries agreed to build a road linking Xinjiang province of China with Pakistan. The road link was to be built in 2 years. Chinese were to provide logistic support to our builders while working on their part of the road in their own territory. A joint survey team fixed the junction point of the Friendship Highway at a 4,700 meters high point on the Karakoram watershed between the two countries in June 1966. The first group of the Pakistani road construction Punjab force boarded C-130s under their dynamic young leader, then Captain Javed Nasser, later on Lieutenant General, and landed at Hotian Airport in China on June 22, 1966. Two thick ropes were tied from the tail to cockpit in the C-130, and all ranks were huddled, made to sit in 4 rows in grotesque poses, holding the rope to stay safe as the aircraft buffeted. And very interestingly, when the plane landed at Chinese airfield in Hotian, it appeared as if the pavement was cracking like biscuits. So these are exact words of Captain Lieutenant General later Javed Nasser. Chinese were so backward in their technology then that even the C-130 landing class was not sufficient for that. But later on, the repairs were done and Chinese helped a lot. The Punjab force was then equipped with Chinese camping gear, winter uniforms. They were given equipment and driven from Hotian to Kashgar via Tashkurgan Pass to the famed Punjab top, where they had to re-establish camp for the project. While getting acclimatized at a height of 20 kilometers short of the pass, over 90% of the soldiers went down with altitude sickness, with 2 succumbing to their illness and embracing martyrdom. These 2 men were the first martyrs of the KKH Highway project. The force landed at Punjab top actually on June 30, 1966, established camp. And the next morning, there were rumors of some demons, jinns, and apparitions who shrieked and screamed throughout the night, disturbing the troops who were quite fatalistic and quite scared, having come so far from their country in the abode of legendary Kokaf. The force commander, Captain Javed Nasser, heard the shrieks and screams throughout the night. Next morning, he ordered the ground under his tent to be dug. The digging revealed that the place where the camp was established was in fact a frozen river bed, where the freezing and thawing produced dreadful noises as the soil particles of moraine rubbed against the stony river bed. With the demon issue thus resolved, the force set about the task of track constructions. It was a unique project in the history of Pakistan Army, where all ranks wore Chinese uniform and worked with picks and shovels without badges of ranks. And many interesting events happened. One day, the commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel M.Z. Kidwai, he was working with troops actually with picks and shovels, and he suddenly collapsed because at that height, heart was under a lot of stress. He felt certain pain and was carried to the regimental medical officer, Captain Tarer. He had nothing with him. He examined him and in a precarious state just injected chloramine fluid directly into his heart. Miraculously, the intervention worked and the colonel recovered. Years later, when he went for a routine examination, I think some 25 to 30 years later, his doctor told him that he had in fact suffered a mild heart attack at Punjab and that his body had formed a natural bypass due to his physical resilience and that he owed his life to the incident at Punjab. Despite hardships, only one incident of desertion happened in the Punjab force. When one of the soldiers, he started, moving away. By the evening, he came back, and because he could go nowhere, no questions were asked. He was just told to join in and start working. The road alignment followed the Punjab River emanating from glacier and were moving through a gorge with steep gradients. The road alignment was kept above the high flood level through a painstaking S-bend construction technique. As the winter approached, the Chinese got worried and supplied the force with more equipment, asking all the while about the winter relief plans. There was no plan. They had planned to close their camp by end September and reopen in the next May, but the relief was not in sight because there were no communications in that era. Providentially, the debonair Air Chief Air Marshal Noor Khan, who was on a routine helicopter trial mission, he was testing a new helicopter. So he flew over the area. He got curious seeing strange faces with Punjabi look and, wearing Chinese uniform. This curiosity made him land, because helicopter in that rarefied environment could not land. So he kept the helicopter on running rotor. He stepped down and met the CEO and asked, "Who are you and what are you doing?" So the CEO related him the entire story of what the force was doing. See, it was such a fascinating story. Within 30 minutes, he took off again, and he straight went back to the CNC on CNC net and told them that, "Look, you have got these troops and there's no relief plan. There must be some, logistic succor for them." The CNC ordered then a makeshift headquarter FW, and the unit was told to man pack everything, carry their equipment, and march all the way to Pasu. And this is another fascinating saga, that those troops, they marched all the way, carrying everything on person, all the way to Pasu. And when they reached Pasu, they thought they deserved rest for a couple of days. The signal was received, because in those days only signals used to come from headquarters FW. The signal was received that start constructing a new airfield at Pasu from next day onward, because we don't want to waste any time. Now, Frontier Works Organization, the proud legatee of Khunjra Force tradition, is again in the forefront of another titanic undertaking under its present dynamic leadership, or yet another Sino-Pak strategic link, that is CPAC. If CPAC is the veritable vehicle of our future economic progress, then FWO can rightly claim to be its engine. The challenges now bear an uncanny resemblance to those halcyon days of 1966, when a new road link promised the dawn of a new era of economic and strategic cooperation between the two countries. The organization's ability to work undeterred under adverse security environment makes it a potent national development tool, presently engaged in development of roads as well as rail links connecting Gwadar and rest of Balochistan with hinterland. It is in the forefront of a communication revolution in the country. That KKI's dream has been fructified in the shape of China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. In fact, was the first step in the initiation of CPAC taken through the vision of the national leadership and the toils of Army Corps of Engineers. After each successful nation-building task, the stock of the military has risen with the population, leading to civil-military value convergence, which besides improving civil-military relations has promoted a rare concordance of values and interests between the two. One of the case studies highlighting above concordance is the civil-military cooperation during the catastrophic earthquake of October 2005. This case study presents a textbook example of civil-military cooperation in a humanitarian complex emergency with valuable lessons of armed forces. So it's a very fascinating tale, because I happen to be a first-hand witness to the whole event. I was commanding that brigade where this event unfolded. So in that capacity, from a military commander on line of control, overnight I was transformed into a humanitarian complex emergency commander. And we were thronged by a host of disaster relief agencies, including UN OCHA, Medicine Sans Frontier, UNDP, there was NATO, and ARC, and if I could count, more than 30 relief organizations were there within first 4 to 5 weeks. And one of the questions that were asked by UN OCHA vice president, who had flown from Vienna and met me, and he asked the first question, you tell me please how this whole thing would gel, because we humanitarian agencies are used to working in an environment, and we are used to comforting people, and you are used to killing people. So this was a cultural shock for me. So because, and I could understand, because he probably did not understand the cultural nuances and the political landscape of our country. And I explained to him that here, this is a binding glue that you will see will gel the humanitarian relief efforts. And the days that followed, that actually confirmed. And once he was moving back, he said that, look, I'm going back with this lesson, and I'm going to present a case study at the UN headquarters at Vienna that here is a complex emergency in which the military was front and center and the relief organizations were in the support role. Now, Army has been playing an important role in Pakistan due to its, organizational capacity, due to its logistic capability. They have the Army engineers, medical corps, signals, which invests it with a better reaction capability, far superior to resource-starved emergency management system of the country. Army's role in disaster management was brought to the fore tellingly during the earthquake. It affected 30,000 square kilometers of area, resulting in almost 74,000 deaths and displacement of over 3.5 million people. So you'll be amazed to know that this was the scale and magnitude of the destruction. And it was not confined to the civilian population. The military, actually, which was manning the line of control, the formation that I was commanding had suffered 74 deaths. And you can understand 74 deaths because of this earthquake. It does a lot to your morale. But hats off to the superhuman effort and resilience and courage of those troops who were injured. They forgot about them. They bandaged themselves and they went out on donkeys and mules. We had our 80 regiment and started giving succor to the population. Had it not been for these doughty warriors, the casualty tolls in those mountainous regions would have been 10 times more. Because what happened was that entire country's effort, attention was riveted at Agla towers, and for first 24 hours, there was no knowledge as to the scale and magnitude of the destruction. Only those formations who are living on line of control, they were in picture as to what has happened. Right. This earthquake that hit the northern region, it struck on October 8. It was a 7.6 Richter scale jolt that shook the areas of Punjab, KP, Bagh, Muzaffarabad, Rawalakot. Most affected were the districts Abbottabad, Mansehra, Battagram, Shangla, Kostan, and Muzaffarabad, Bagh, Neelam, Rawalakot in AJK. Magnitude was such that the entire administrative machinery had collapsed in one fell swoop, including in districts of KP. It was a decapitating blow from nature that impacted common people, government structure, and army units deployed in the seismically impacted zone with equal ferocity. While the attention of the entire nation was riveted initially here, slowly the information trickled as to what had happened. The civilian population living near the army units was extended all possible help, but the odds were stacked against the civilians and the military personnel due to the collapsing infrastructure and the impending winter. In those heights, even October was cold enough, and you could not survive in open unless there was some cover. The people lay buried beneath the debris of their homes with virtually no equipment except few recovery cranes belonging to army units. Biggest challenge was to clear the roads and reach the inaccessible mountainous areas to rescue trapped people who needed food, medical, and shelter help on emergency basis. The sheer difficulty of the relief operation resulted in a temporary paralysis of action in the benumbed senses, which slowly came out of the trauma. And the trauma was such that even the administrative people who had not suffered these grievous injuries, they were psychologically so disturbed that they refused to work. So the only elements who could create a semblance of order were the local military units in Muzaffarabad, Bagh, Rawalakot, and close to Balakot. The hospitals were gone, and so were the schools and the shops, leaving cities like Bagh, Balakot, and Muzaffarabad completely unfit for community living. Disposal of dead bodies and treatment of the injured and the sick appeared to be the first challenge, but to undertake those tasks, first hurdle was how to reach those areas. All the roads from Punjab to AJK were blocked by heavy slides, and the airlift resources were too less to cater for the rescue. It was that hour of crisis when those whose job was to manage violence, that is army, and those whose job was to manage relief, humanitarian agencies, gelled together in an epic relief and rescue effort. that would become a textbook case study for civil-military cooperation in a humanitarian emergency. The military at once rose to the challenge by establishing a relief and logistics hub at Rawalpindi and Chaklala, pushing forward relief goods, medical aid, volunteers through air as well as ground routes. Corps of Engineers was mobilized within 24 hours to open all main roads leading to earthquake-hit areas, because the civilian road clearance machinery like PWD had become totally inactive. Roads were cleared in record time, 3 days, all roads, all slides, over 300 slides from Bagh, Kotli Satya, Rawalpindi, Murree, Deerkot, Rawalakot, and Bagh, Muzaffarabad, Chinari, 300 slides, they were cleared. Army aviation helicopters then made a air bridge to KP and AJK, transporting relief goods and evacuating casualties. When the helicopters could not operate due to inclement weather, the sturdy all-weather mules took over. So these mules did a great job. These were man's best friend in those times, because when the cloud cover was on, nothing could move, no helicopter support, people were dying. And these mules, each one of them, I still remember, could carry 70 kg. These are those mule artillery and mule animal pack. So these were pressed into service, and I think thousands of lives which were saved owe to these tough animals and their equally tough handlers. The army at once was recovering to tend to its own dead and injured, besides rebuilding its fighting and living bunkers on those icy heights of Kashmir and participating actively in relief efforts for the civilian population. 3 divisions of army were mobilized, moved to earthquake-hit areas on emergency basis. For first 2 weeks, the only relief force in AJK comprised army units, as the civilian district administration and political leadership had been rendered dysfunctional due to human as well as infrastructural losses. Army emerged as the veritable binding glue that held the relief effort together, creating conditions for operational as well as national and international relief organizations in a safe and secure environment. The commitment and dedication of thousands of Pakistani Army personnel, NGOs, and hundreds of volunteers, and especially doctors who had come all the way from Cuba. The Cuban doctors, especially their ladies, did a great job. Their lady doctors, they climbed the top mountains faster than us. And they were greatly reassured by the presence of an army. And it was first time in the history of the country that civilian relief organization crossed the strategic, very famous Haji Pir Pass and went all the way to the crossing place, which overlooked Indian Uri city. So this will be remembered as a golden chapter of altruism in Pakistan's history. Speaking of Bagh only, where I was, only one of the worst hit earthquake districts was Bagh. Army's effort, along with international rescue teams, which included Spain, Turkey, and Denmark, to mention a few, provided relief and prompt medical aid. And the entire NATO force was moved from Kabul, from Afghanistan. They included Poles, they included Danes, they included Norwegians, they included British, and they came with all the equipment. And when I met one of the lady captains, she was from Poland. So I asked her, what have you come here for? She said that I brought these huge cranes and earth-moving machinery, and nobody knew how to move those cranes and machinery because they had come, but that was of no use because of the narrow roads. So we gradually opened those roads and used that machinery to remove the debris. Besides damage to the army units, the general population of District Bagh suffered following losses as given on the view file. As you can see, it was quite a lot. Pakistan Army Aviation took the lead. The figures speak for themselves. They took off from Qasim base in the evening and had evacuated on the first day around 50 to 60 seriously injured civil and military persons. operating in bad weather conditions. And one of the Mi-17s crashed right in front of me. And because the pilot had refused to go back and he was pressing ahead for a second, round of relief operations. So those are the kind of sacrifices rendered by Army aviation, along with, of course, great help from United States of America. The Chinooks made a air bridge, and all the Chinooks were at my disposal as a brigade commander. So we used them extensively to ferry relief material, as well as corrugated galvanized iron sheets, which were in great demand because there was nothing else to make your houses as temporary shelters. The state of heli sorties from 8th October is you've seen. The medical community, another very, very important component which responded to the call of duty with exemplary devotion. These included civil doctors and the hospitals. They provided the medical support they provided. This saved human life. And there was a FTC setup which contributed a lot, establishing hospitals and providing medical cover wherever it was needed. Several hospitals were established, and doctors treated all the population. The first challenge was the debris removal. If you go to the next slide. So a monumental 200 million of debris, it choked the streets, and it was removed in record times. Then the government established a central coordination office. So this response came later. Could you show the next slide, please? The areas that were prioritized were, rescue, medical treatment, provision of relief. This was a federal relief cell. This came into operation after the first few weeks, once bulk of the, relief effort was already underway, and its organization is as flashed. Next slide, please. It had a military wing, it had a civilian wing, both were working in close cooperation. And one of the military generals was in charge of that. Now go to the next slide, please. So as you can see on the slide, there was support from foreign countries, NGOs, domestic sources, and establishment of forward bases ensured that support was rendered, smoothly to the forward areas. And then the distribution areas and these nodes, they were all over those difficult areas. And this became, in fact, a model for one UN concept later on. This feedback we received from, UNDP, and they said that this case study had yielded one UN concept, that one cluster having all the relief efforts would be created. And this model was replicated in other complex emergencies as well. Next slide, please. So go ahead. We already covered. So a recap of the entire damage. 73,000 deaths, injured, and all that. And all that was taken care of because the civil and military components came together in a classic case of civil military convergence. Go to slide 38. 38, please. Next, please. Right. So this was this quote by Andrew McCloy, the chief of operations, UN Emergency Coordination Center, sums it all. What started off on paper as two unlikely allies, the humanitarians and military, due to bad memories of past, the cluster coordination mechanism put in place at Islamabad was replicated in the field hubs, with all parties seeking to work through the national distrust that the military had with humanitarians and vice versa, until strong relationships were built. Over time, the humanitarian operations and military operations became so interlinked that at strategic level, there could no longer be any meaningful division between the military operation and the humanitarian operation. Next, please. So to conclude quickly, the lessons for civil military cooperation and disaster relief: a renewed faith and respect on part of the affected population for the armed forces was created. So contributing to that concordance theory of Rebecca Schiff, wherein the humanitarian support operations helped foster that linkage between the political elite, that is the government, armed forces, and the population. And then the civilian district administration's appreciation of Army special competencies was a newfound discovery by them, because henceforth they became more smoothly, involved with the military other than the security centered help. Another crowning achievement was the establishment of Earthquake Relief and Reconstruction Authority led by Army leadership. This did a great job, so we'll not dwell on that. Coming over to the impact. So Army came to be viewed as one of the most reliable instruments of national development and relief because of this small, contribution. Confidence of bureaucracy and civilian government in Army's ability to respond was enhanced, and civil military cooperation and the people's faith in the military's humanitarian support promoted a synergy with, the words of Rebecca Schiff, developed the much needed concordance between the political elite, armed force, and the people that strengthened civil military bonds at state and society level. So when we criticize the military for its role expansion, I think these are the shining examples that we must remember and emulate and learn lessons from. And, the civil military coordination, cooperation, and remaining well within the constitutional ambit should be our credo. And at the end, the objective is served if it serves the purpose of facilitating the much needed concordance between the three elements which Rebecca referred to. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Rashid Janjua. I think you start with the theories of civil military relations and the three waves, and you made a very important, I think it is from American researcher, what to keep the army out, bring them in. And overdeveloped state, you talked about overdeveloped state and underdeveloped political system. This needs some debate, because a state cannot be overdeveloped if the political system is underdeveloped. In aid of civil power, I think whenever we are called, everybody is happy. But whenever we are told to go back, we at times tend not to listen to that. That probably creates a problem. You gave two very good case studies. One was evolution of FW, which started with the building of KKH, and the case study of earthquake. I think you will agree with me that many civil private groups were also mobilized to support the earthquake message. They came a bit late. I'm talking about the Pakistani, thing. And the concordance which you were talking about, maybe it was rather temporary. I do not know whether it still exists or not. But thank you very much. We'll listen to you more in the question and answer session. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to invite Professor Emeritus Dr. Munis Hammer to give his views.
Thank you very much. I must thank Islamabad Policy Research Institute for this very timely initiative to organize a conference on the role of armed forces in national development and its impact on civil-military relations. It's a huge topic. I have around 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, and it's a post-lunch session. So people are, bit tired. So I don't want to, you have to bear with me of the time which I have at my disposal. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation. Perhaps, I don't know if General Janjua will come, Nasir Janjua will come with the PowerPoint presentation. But I don't have that with me, although I have been doing it. But this time, somehow, I decided not to. It's better to focus on to have, some type of eye contact and direct conversation. The speaker and the audience. Now, when I was approached by Brigadier Rashid Wali around 3 weeks ago for this activity, for this program, and I told him that I may be in Islamabad on the 15th because of some planned tour to Kagan and Naran, these areas, which have been opened after 2 years almost. So coming from all such places, yesterday evening when I reached Islamabad and today here, basically there are 3 things which I would like to focus on. The topic is quite sensitive also, given the political history of Pakistan, 73 years. Out of 73 years, military has been in direct control for roughly 33 years, half of the age of Pakistan. And many things have happened, which I don't want to mention here. The first thing is basically that when we talk about national development, it basically means a situation in which there's a process of human development, of social development, development at various levels. And no nation can certainly progress unless it is economically strong and politically stable. There cannot be any development because the perception basically that regardless of whatever the armed forces may be claiming, as was mentioned by my predecessor, absolutely, I mean, the role of armed forces in disaster management and things like that. Why is it so that all the efforts of the armed forces, the country is not, I'm not saying that it is not the right track. Country is not seen the outside world as economically strong, politically stable. There are various reasons for that why we have not been able to. Why there is, this is the question, why there is the role of armed forces in national development? Why is it so? We heard from the speakers from Indonesia and from Turkey and from Russia, all such. And it is because of their commitment for national duty. If it is a national army, national army is an army where there is a representation from all the regions of the country or the provinces of the country. So the national army, national duty. That is something which we have to bear in mind. And it is also because of when there is the process, when the armed forces are literally, begged, please help us for to cope with, like in case of Karachi, when last year, the devastation caused because of the rain and things like that. The Karachi transformation plan, it involved also the armed forces to clear the city from, various. It has to do with the weak civilian institutions, which was mentioned as about the overdeveloped military, overdeveloped state, and military as an integral part of a state. Absolutely, judiciary, military, bureaucracy. So when weak civilian institutions and such institutions It is their job. If it is their job, then why the armed forces are called for the floods and the disaster management and crisis management and things like that? And how the armed forces, they play their role as far as national development is concerned, by aiding civilian authorities to cope with insurgency. I mean, insurgency, natural disasters, and violence. Because when there is violence, when there's insurgency going on, there cannot be any development. Absolutely, you take any example. So the armed forces are called in order to deal with natural disasters, insurgencies, and violence. And if we have Lieutenant General Nasir Janjua, then he will talk about Balochistan. That Balochistan is a province of Pakistan which has 44% of the area. 44% of the area of Pakistan is Balochistan. But then why is it so that people talk about inside and outside Pakistan that there's a great game going on in Balochistan? Absolutely. So how the armed forces play their role? By aiding civilian authorities. And by the way, let me also mention here that since 1947 till today, in 73 years history of Pakistan, this is for the first time that the armed forces have been out of power for a longer duration. Like 1947 to 58, 11 years, when the armed forces were not in power. 1958 martial law, although martial law was lifted in 1962, but then General Ayub Khan was in power and the military had an upper hand. 1969, another martial law till 1971. The third martial law, 1977, which was the longest martial law for 8 years, 77 to 1985, 31st December 1985, when martial law was lifted, but certainly General Zia, as the Chief of Army Staff, remained in power till 17th of August 1988, longest military rule. And then from 1988 till 1999, 11 years. So 1999, October 12th, when military took over, there was no martial law, but there was a coup. And General Musharraf, he didn't impose martial law, but he was a chief executive, then he became president, but he was Chief of Army Staff all the way till November 2007. And then when he resigned in August 2008. So since August 2008 till 2021, we have to analyze this thing. The longest era. 2 governments have completed their term. The third government is completing its term. There are various, like Professor Stephen P. Cohen, late Professor Stephen P. Cohen, a renowned historian and a political scientist, absolutely, he was the one who did a pioneering work on Pakistan Army, his book on Pakistan Army. And then how he discussed civil-military relations in his book, The Idea of Pakistan. That why is it so that the military has always been at the helm of affairs? So the role of armed forces in national development for Pakistan can be looked at like national integration. I attended there was a workshop in National Defense University way back in 2015, May, on national harmony and integration. And National Defense University is basically a military-run institution. So, National Security Workshop organized by the National Defense University. So one needs to take into account the fact that the military has been in the recent past, very much involved in developing concepts and theories as far as national integration is concerned. But national integration cannot be imposed. It has to evolve. There cannot be top-bottom approach. It has to be a bottom-top approach. National integration, nation building. So how the armed forces have been, simulation exercises and various other activities, the Command and Staff College, Quetta, at the National Defense University, at the Naval War College, and elsewhere, Air War College in Karachi. But then why it is basically the affair to a large extent as far as the armed forces are? Because it is perceived that armed forces are the only institution which is keeping the country together. But that is wrong. That's very dangerous, because if the entire responsibility is put on the armed forces. Although it has to be a situation where the people of Pakistan, or whosoever is in power, or the elected government in power, it should be their responsibility. The second thing is about infrastructure development. National Logistics Cell, NLC, that's basically, it was created during Zia's era, early 80s, National Logistics Cell. Frontier Works Organization to construct roads and bridges, and that's also primarily a military-run organization. National Command Operations Center, this is recent. National Command and Operations Center, that is NCOC, to deal with the pandemic, also has the input from the military. There's a Lieutenant General who is also there as KKH, which was mentioned by my producer, and many other projects, Fauji Foundation, Shaheen Foundation, Army Welfare. I mean, there's so many. And the reason basically is given that since early 50s, 1951 onwards, when Liaquat Ali Khan, Pakistan's first Prime Minister, was assassinated in Rawalpindi. That was the time when the nexus between the military and the bureaucracy, and how the political parties were marginalized. I mean, they blame each other, that politicians or political parties were never ever allowed to function. Never ever allowed to function. So then, of course, in law and order, constitutionally speaking, but then the thing is basically that during the pandemic, I think 3 months ago, when there was the call from the government, NCOC, and that the armed forces should be involved to enforce the SOPs, standard operating procedures, for the pandemic and to combat as far as the coronavirus is concerned. But was it the duty of armed forces to enforce that people should wear masks or SOPs and other things? So the more and more involvement of armed forces, the more basically raised a fundamental question about the legitimacy and the credibility as far as the political parties or the civilian governments concerned. In case of maintenance of canals, जिसको हम कहते हैं, which we call as bhal safai, the armed forces involved. Census, I met a Lieutenant General who may have retired 3-4 years ago, who was the Corps Commander in Peshawar, or I don't know which. So he was given the responsibility to, that was in 2017, during Nawaz Sharif's time, government, to hold census. Is it the duty of armed forces to hold census? And then many other things, elections, to supervise elections. And when there was the election in Daska, in Sialkot, the PMLN said that no, we will not welcome the enforcement, by the of this elections, arrangement of elections, management of elections by the armed forces. So that it was not done over there. But 2018 elections, the armed forces were involved in that. So in the province of Sindh, which I belong, serious law and order problem in the interior of Sindh, in Karachi, and then how the armed and the paramilitary forces and the armed forces were called 1992. First, there was the operation when General Asad Nawaz was the Chief of Army Staff against the dacoits in the interior of Sindh, and then in urban Sindh there was the military operation. So Sindh is certainly a case study to how the during Zia's time the cantonment in Pannu Akhil was established. Regardless of the opposition from the locals, that cantonment was, because the insurgency was going on in Sindh at that time after the movement for the restoration of democracy in 1983. It was called as the insurgency. The Pannu Akhil cantonment was established because there was no cantonment between Karachi, Hyderabad, and then the border of Punjab. So that is what was the idea behind. And the Pannu Akhil cantonment was basically also to deal with how the Indian, the military, offensive during the Operation Brass Tacks, 1986-87. So Sindh is certainly a case study, is very vulnerable because, and of course, in Karachi, how the law and order situation, the rangers every 3 months, every 6 months, there is the renewal of the authority rangers that they should help civil government for the maintenance of law and order. Third thing is about the dynamics of civil-military relations. Their perceptions. We may agree or disagree with perceptions. And certainly, unfortunately, what has happened is that truth is the casualty. We are not interested in hearing the truth. There's always a tendency in our part of the world to hide, to cover up. Who killed Liaquat Ali Khan? Operation Gibraltar, 1965 war, right? Who killed Ziaul Haq? What was the Ojri camp disaster? What happened to the report of Ojri camp, April 1988? The Kargil operation, right? The Aptabad Operation Jeremino, May 2011. And many other, the reports have not. So basically, the perception, the first perception is, and since we are here, and Pakistan is, of course, a democratic country, and at least we have a freedom to express our views with arguments, with reason. The perception that when we talk about civil-military relations, that there is asymmetry, there is imbalance, and then the perception that there are certain no-go areas where the civilian government cannot encroach, whether we agree or disagree. The first no-go areas, because that is, I mean, these are the domain of the military, like the nuclear program, like India, Afghanistan, United States, China, the policies, and dealing with all such. Till the time there was an agreement, verbal agreement between Benazir Bhutto, who was, whose party secured a majority during 1988 elections, November 16th, 1988. But power was not being transferred to her. The perception that power was only transferred to her when there was some sort of an understanding between Benazir and the then Chief of Army Staff, General Islam Beg, that Benazir's government will not encroach as far as such no-go areas concerned, which Nawaz Sharif refused. And when Benazir, she was not, adhering to her verbal commitment, her government was dismissed in 1990, August. And Nawaz Sharif's government was dismissed. And the civilian governments, why such civilian governments, when there was the 8th Amendment, were dismissed? And the president had dismissed all such governments. And when Nawaz Sharif's second government was toppled on October 12th, 1999, the second perception is that the political leadership is incompetent and corrupt. You know, the thing is basically, there may be truth in that. Absolutely. There may be truth. But when there is a tendency, there's a pattern in Pakistan's politics not to give free hand to such governments, all the way, you know, since Khwaja Nazimuddin and onwards, all such governments, they are corrupt. And since they are corrupt, they are incompetent. They cannot run, you know, state institutions. They cannot be credible as far as the governance thing concerned, bad governance. The third perception is basically that Pakistan is still a deep state. There's a theory of deep state, you know, that a state where you have some of the individuals or the institutions who hold power. And the depth and reach of that deep state is unparalleled. Pakistan is a deep state where there is preeminence in the mode of governance and foreign policy. It is basically the military establishment, the security establishment, which runs the state. That's a perception. It may be right, it may be wrong. And then there are questions that how come Turkey and Bangladesh, these two countries experienced military takeover repeatedly. How Turkey and Bangladesh, they've controlled the ambitions of non-political forces. It reminds me that Turkey is, of course, I mean, like we heard the presentation, the Turkish side. In case of Bangladesh, I remember that it was reported that when the Chief of Army Staff was trying to assert his position, he was called by the Prime Minister Khaleda Zia to resign, and he had to resign. Not that the Chief of Army Staff is outside the country, and you plan it in such a clumsy manner that you retire the Chief of Army Staff who is not inside the country. Although Nawaz Sharif had the powers to retire or to dismiss the services chiefs, but he used the other, he followed the other approach, which backfired. But Khaleda Zia, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, she called the Chief of Army Staff and she said that you leave, and he had to. Now, in case of Turkey also, it is basically, I think, economic development which matters. When the government is able to deliver in terms of improving the quality of life of people, clean and safe drinking water, better health and education facilities, human security, then in such, when the state is pursuing that approach in terms of human and social development, the civilian government is bound to strengthen its position. But if the civilian government or a political government is not doing its job, or if the provincial governments, like there are allegations against all the provincial governments of corruption and nepotism, including the Sindh government. So therefore, a respect of a country is basically earned. And it is earned if the country's leadership is above corruption and nepotism. When the focus and priority is on human and social development, automatically the non-political forces will lose their preeminence or their significance. So I think we have to bear in mind the fact that as long as the institutions, the political parties are not able to mature, are not able to be above the family fiefdom. In fact, I would say that political parties are not political parties in the real sense, because such parties are run by the mafias or by those who feel that it is their legitimate right to rule the people of Pakistan. I mean, like we have seen and we are witnessing such things. So political parties like in Germany, where I had the opportunity to work in various policies oriented think tanks and in universities, that every political party in Germany, if it secures 5% of the votes in Bundestag, that is the parliament, then the federal government is bound to support the foundations of such political parties. Like, for example, the Christian Social Union has a foundation which is called as the Hans Sedel Foundation. The Christian Democratic Party, yes, sure. Oh, I'm so sorry. Christian Democratic Party has its own foundation. Greens Party has its own foundation. Social Democratic Party has its a Frederick Abbott Stiftung. You know, these foundations are provided financial support by the federal government of Germany, regardless of their, programs and all that. And such foundations have their offices all over the world, and it is Germany which benefits. So to end, I think there will always be a question mark in terms of civil-military relations in Pakistan, till the time our political parties are able to establish themselves as political parties, not as fiefdoms. This is very simple to understand. As long as Pakistan remains a feudal society, this mindset, a tribal feudal society, as long as there is extremism, then that how intolerance, extremism, militancy, radicalization, violence, and terrorism. This is, I'll just take one minute. This is what the Prime Minister of Pakistan, when he was not the Prime Minister of Pakistan, 5 years ago, used to say that 2.5 million children out of his school. 2.5 million, now there are more. That is something which we have to understand, but time will not wait for us. This is 2021. 500 years ago, 200 years ago, it was okay. But now, if a country is not able to stabilize its economy, its political system, is dependent as far as, economic assistance is concerned to the IMF and World Bank and Saudi Arabia or UAE or many, or China, people of China. So that basically disturbs people like us. Those who genuinely want Pakistan to become a role model, as we were a role model 50, 60 years ago. So therefore, national development is very essential, certainly, but it should not be national development only on paper. It should trickle down. And the armed forces, certainly, they have played a very useful role. They have played a pivotal role. But then, because of the acts of some of the individuals belonging to that institution got discredited. So therefore, thank you very much again for providing me the opportunity to express my views about national development and civil military relations. But certainly Pakistan is in deep, let me share, is in deep crisis. There's a major threat. And the problem is basically that those external powers or actors who have been singled out, that they want to damage Pakistan, but it cannot be done unless there are people in Pakistan who are collaborating with them. It's not possible. And we don't need any enemy unless there are people in Pakistan who miss no opportunity to accomplish their vested interests. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed Ahmed Saab. You started off by saying that this is a very sensitive topic, but then you touched all the sensitive subjects. Thank you for that. You said that development is actually in the domain of human development, social development, economic development, rightly so. You questioned whether Pakistan Army is a national army. I don't know whether you questioned it or not, but you did talk about a national army. I hope you are convinced that Pakistan Army is a national army. I don't know what you have in your mind. You covered the history of martial law and civil governments, and you raised a very pertinent question that role of armed forces that are actually in the domain of civil government and institutions. Why do they undertake that? That is a question which should be asked from the civil government, because they call us, they call the armed forces, and why can't they do it themselves? Unifying force, whether Pakistan Army is a unifying force or not, that is also questionable. You said that it may not be true that Pakistan Army is a unifying force. Then talked about various organizations, NLC, FW, NCOC, and you forgot that even the locust control was given to the army. So why it was given, I don't know. Who's responsible if other organizations are not delivering? You talked about Daska elections. I hope, sir, you remember that once there was a problem of recounting, PMLN said that please give all the boxes to the army so that they can look after it. So why did they say that? You talked of perception and truth. I think that's true. Deep state is not only in Pakistan. Deep states are everywhere, sir, even in the United States, even in India. And how Turkey controlled non-political forces, I think that was covered very well. Ladies and gentlemen, we are lucky that we have Mr. Kirill with us. Is he around? Sorry. Yes. So he has been waiting for a very long time. So we'll take questions both for the professor and also for Mr. Kirill before we wind up.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. As it is recapitulated by you, what General Musharraf used to say, that the army is brought in so that to keep the army out. While we talk about civil military relations, I would like to make a brief comment, and then you can pinpoint my question from that. As far as civil military relations is concerned, so basically it's the two stratas. The military is well groomed, the military is looked after in aid. It's always considered as a savior of the country, superior training, superior logistic support institutions as well. Whereas as far as civilians are concerned, they are considered as a agal bacha tanzeem. They come down from a backward society. They don't have the institutional grooming, and the civilians looked up to army in sense of political aspect as well, to save them and give them power, as well as institutional support also, as you pointed out, that the PWD was totally inactive, so that the army was brought in. So my question is that shouldn't there be a new dialogue between the army and the civilian and the military infrastructure, so that the entire paradigm is groomed and this relationship is developed into a more positive and healthy manner? Thank you.
Okay, so quick answer to your question is, actually, you mentioned about disparity in capacities, and I don't know. I don't rate that as much a capacity deficit as much as a function of perception. Nowadays, Army has its own, competencies. The civilian component has its own strengths and competencies. A lot of strength has come. You see our parliament, the way it has changed. A lot of educated people are in. There is a democratic consolidation process. Two successful, transitions which have taken place. Institutions are getting strengthened. See the judiciary, see the kind of independence, see Election Commission of Pakistan, see the media. So these are the strengths of the civilian component of the state. And I don't subscribe to that theory that there is something, they are run down. Or what was perhaps very ably pointed out by Dr. Munis was the political institutionalization amongst the political parties. Yes, we do tend to agree there is a room for improvement, and political institutions have to be at the party level. There should be internal democracy, better link with the masses, and only then that they will just, get the kind of reverence that the military evokes. Now, your question, how is need for a dialogue? To me, yes, dialogue should always be there. There are channels open nowadays, media, workshops, such like seminars. So these are the kind of avenues where dialogue takes place. Then your biggest dialogue is your social contract, your constitution, which embodies the will, which embodies the thinking, the social contract, the liberties that have been ceded by the people to the state. It's all there. So if we follow that, and there are channels open, it's not a closed society like a totalitarian state. There are seminars, there are media, there are so many avenues. So in many ways, that dialogue is happening. And this event is also part of that. Hope I have answered you. Okay. From Russian, because he waited for too long, we have a we have a Russian speaker who's waiting, and I think if there are any questions, we would welcome, because then he might have to leave. He has to leave somewhere.
Okay, I am Karim Khan from PIDE. Basically, my question is from you as well. Actually, you talked about earthquake relief measures by the army and something more. I agree with you, but probably don't you think that these capabilities are due to the resources that you have at your disposal? For instance, in this budget, the allocation to army or defenses around 1,400 billion rupees. And if you see the allocation for SDG, higher education, and health collectively is 142 billion. So what my question is, if these abilities are probably due to resources, I guess. And if you allocate resources to, like, say, hospitals, they would be able to do things. This is not, this doesn't mean that they cannot do the things, but maybe they are deficient of resources. And similar with other civilian institutions, like if you compare army with police. So police can do the things, but actually they don't have the resources that much, at least, which you have at your disposal. So I would like your comment on this.
No, nobody can disagree with you, because there needs to be more spending on health and education. We always have been recommending in our research studies policy briefs also the same thing, that Pakistan needs at the moment to, peddling less than 2%, spending on health and education. So this percentage of GDP spending needs to be enhanced. How it can be enhanced? If you enhance the economic pie, PSDP, defense, administration, all those are elements which are essential for running of the state. And I agree with you that these capacities and these competencies come with resources. and our civilian component of the state, which includes healthcare, which includes emergency response. You didn't touch upon that because the emergency response, disaster response, essentially is a civilian function. So they should be the first responders, national NDMA and the disaster relief. We had teams from Turkey, incidentally, which had specialized, which came to us during the earthquake. So we used to wonder even then that why is it that there's no team here? And for your, you'll be interested to know that we recommended from the army channels that civilian capacity building in disaster relief should be given priority, so that next earthquake comes, we don't look towards army. So I couldn't agree more with you.
I'm a Marshal Farad. Capacity building is not, in my view, only resources. The most important factor for any organization to grow is the commitment to the mission. Just look at 30th June when the government returns are coming to the parliament. Most of these departments have left their budgets unused. Important departments like health, education, there's lack of commitment for using the existing resources. Military uses the resources because the institution is developed, like said, hundreds of years ago. So the commitment to use the resources is one. I don't think in Pakistan there's a shortage of resources in any department. Sir, वो थोड़ी सी इतनी है ना कि उसको क्या उसका इफेक्ट आ रहा है? That's my question.
तो खैर मैं उर्दू में इसलिए बोल रहा हूँ कि और लोग कि अगर उस्ताद क्लास को नहीं पढ़ाता या जज रोज तारीखें डालता है और मुकदमे नहीं सुनता, तो वो भी रिसोर्सेज की कमी की वजह से आपके ख्याल में अगर है तो ठीक है. तो वो जो उनका पॉइंट है कि कुछ और चीजें भी हैं, रिसोर्सेज बिल्कुल ठीक. आई हैव टू आस्क अ क्वेश्चन फ्रॉम मिस्टर किरण because we are thank you very much for waiting for us. Can you hear me, Mr. Kiran?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you very much. What is the normal thing in your country, Russia, that whenever there is a national calamity or there is some emergent situation, who comes for the rescue of the people of Russia?
Yes, thank you very much. It's a good question. So since the beginning of the 90s, Russia has a special force for emergency response. It's called MCS, like Emercom. So it's a militarized emergency response force that formally has the right to wear weapons, but they don't, like in practice. So they are the first one. They are the first responders, and they are also sometimes sent abroad for emergency response as well. The military has the right to assist the emergency response operations, but to be honest, I from the top of my head, I can't recall at least a single mission when the military was intervened with major force to support emergency operations.
So if nobody else has, then I have. Ms. Kuril, I have a question that's about your defense industry. You mentioned the armed forces role and their capacity in military industries. So what is the percentage and how much is the contribution of the civilian sector in your defense industry? And vis-a-vis them, how's your military helping shore up that industry?
Yes, thank you very much. It's an excellent question. And unfortunately, in order to answer it with evidence, some parts of the defense budget have to be made public, because as of now, it's classified information. But from what can I see from open sources, media reports, especially since 2008, 2009, the presence of civilian enterprises steadily grown. They started with basic logistical functions such as catering and healthcare support and like other more, let's say, how can I put it? Perhaps legitimately more like civilian functions, quote unquote, right? And what we see now, that especially in such spheres, but they are also quite secret, as cyber and artificial intelligence, there are numerous small and medium enterprises that work for the Ministry of Defense. And they are mostly located in St. Petersburg and Moscow. But unfortunately, to estimate the share of the civilian enterprises, well, we just don't have any data. So I cannot answer this question. And I think officials from the Ministry of Defense might answer it, but I'm not sure that actually they would with such data.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kirill, for bearing with us and being patient for such a long time. You've been very useful for us to make us understand the Russian system, the military system, and how it interfaces with the civilian setups. Thank you very much. We look forward to interact with you again also, and we'll inshallah keep in touch. So kind of.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now we are running out of time, and without listening to Excellency Ambassador Inam Saab, it will be useless this entire sitting. So sir, with your permission, I'll just give one or two examples, and then please whatever you would like to say. Because I've been Secretary of Defense also, and I've seen the government in some other angles also. I'll just give you two examples, especially for you, sir, so that you also understand that why Army has to do things which are not supposed to be done by us. There should be a national policy document. And that national policy document must contain all the policies, at least the policy guidelines on which other documents must get made, whether it is the defense policy or foreign policy, interior policy, finance policy. When it is not only when I was defense secretary, it has happened with all the defense secretaries that we wanted that where is that document, that national policy document, from where we should derive the defense policy. It was not there. So then what we did was that we made a defense policy draft document, because we were not supposed to make that. So that can happen. There's no problem. Foreign Office can make a foreign policy draft, and we made a defense policy draft. And then I sent it up to the government that please endorse it and make it a document. They never signed it. It came back as a draft. So then we made a defense policy ourselves, got it signed from the defense minister or prime minister, whoever, and that was lined. So you tell me, sir, that what should we have done if there are no policy coming from the government and we make our own policy, then who's to be blamed? One thing I would like to clarify, that Pakistan Army is the only institution, and I can boast on that, where the recruitment is exactly according to the district census in the entire Pakistan. Of course, there are problems where people do not come from Balochistan and Sindh, but exactly the number of soldiers in Pakistan armed forces, not only army, and armed forces are according to the ratios of the population in various districts. This can be verified, what I am saying. And I'll give you one more example. There came a complaint from People's Party government that why everybody should be visiting Chief of Army Staff and calling on him. Anybody coming, Tom, Dick and Harry, they say that we want to, call on Army Chief. And why are you willing to meet them? We said, very good. I think this is a good idea. Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab was the foreign minister. And I gave it in writing that please in future, because all the itineraries made by the Foreign Office, whenever some foreign delegation comes, the itinerary is made by the Foreign Office. They decide that where they should be going. So we said that please don't put them in that itinerary. And after 2 weeks, people again started coming to us, and they were again calling on the Army Chief, whatever was the reason. So what I'm saying is that it is not only a army chief who wants to meet them. There are other factors also for whatever are the reasons. So I would say that there are only two options, and we have, after listening to the Indonesian journal and also the Turk journal, excuse me, if we really want to put the army back into its, where it belongs, and I think that is required. I totally agree with that, because without that, we are not a normal state. So to be a normal state, everybody must work according to the constitution. And for that, we have two options. One is the Turkish option, the other is the Indonesian option. Indonesian option is that the armed forces decide for themselves to contract and come back to that. That is what they did. And then things they start moving. And what the Turkish model is that the political forces delivered, they established their supremacy, and then they told the armed forces, please go back. So that is the other model. My only submission is that if people come to power with the help of money, and once in power, they make more money, and there's no democracy within the parties, one. In superior judiciary, there is so much of lateral entries that 98, 99% the superior judges are all those lawyers which were actually part of some political party before joining the superior judiciary. How can they dispense justice? As far as the media is concerned, you can just listen to any anchor for 5 minutes, and I can tell you, and you can tell me that he's being sponsored by whom. It is so easy to find out, all these things. So if the political parties are not ready to reform themselves, if judiciary is not ready to reform themselves, if media is not ready to reform themselves, and all guns are towards armed forces, I am afraid it will not happen. It should happen. I'm afraid it will not happen. Everybody has to take 2 steps back. If you can't take it simultaneously, I don't know then that reconciliation or that dialogue is required. Who will actually conduct that, and how will that happen? I do not know. Thank you very much. I will not take much of time, sir. Over to you.